the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Peace be upon you, O Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra. Peace be upon you, O daughter of the Prophet. Peace be upon you, O wife of Haydar. Peace be upon you, O mother of the Imams. Peace be upon you, O mother of our beloved Mahdi. Peace be upon you, O community of sorrow. Peace be upon you, O inheritors of Fatima's patience. Peace be upon you, O those who seek to mend what has been broken. Welcome to Night 3 of the Truth Promoters Group Fatimiyyah 2025 program. Over these nights, we have journeyed through Wilayah in the home, from laying the first stitch of faith through weaving the tapestry of daily life. Tonight, in our final evening session, we confront the hardest truth. Sometimes tapestries tear, sometimes homes break, sometimes the trial seems insurmountable. Sayyedah Fatimah, peace be upon her, knew this more than anyone. Her home was invaded, her body crushed, her inheritance stolen, her husband's right usurped. Yet she remained the pillar of patience, the fountain of faith. Tonight's Quranic verses include Surah Al-Rum, the chapter of the Romans, 30th chapter of the Quran, verse 21, on the divine signs of marriage. Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, 2nd chapter of the Quran, verse 187, on the spouses being garments for each other. Surah Al-Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse 19, on true nobility. Surah An-Nur, the chapter of the light, 24th chapter of the Quran, verse 34, on divine enrichment. Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 19, on living with kindness. Surah Al-Shar, the chapter of the opening of the heart, 94th chapter of the Quran, verse 6, on divine ease in hardship. And Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, 2nd chapter of the Quran, verse 156, on patience in trials. To view the full verses and their visual interpretation, please visit www.islamicdigest.org.
In the name of God, the merciful, the especially merciful.
And of his signs is that he created for you spouses from among yourselves, so that you may find rest in them, and he put between you affection and compassion. Most surely there are signs in this for people who reflect. They are a garment for you, and you are a garment for them. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you. If they are poor, God will enrich them out of his grace, and God is all bounteous, all knowing. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Those who, when calamity strikes them, say, "Truly we belong to God, and truly to him we shall return."
Welcome back. Our final evening's poetic couplet is titled Mending the Tapestry. You can watch the couplet video and access the full text at www.islamicdigest.org.
When trials tear the fabric of our days, and Zahra's tears illuminate our ways, we say with those who bore the greatest pain, to God we all belong, to him return again. With hardship comes the ease, the Quran's promise true.
We now come to our final evening lecture, Wilayah in the Home, Mending the Tapestry, Trials, Trust, and Turning to God, will be presented by Sheikh Shabir Hassan Ali. This session courageously addresses the most difficult realities. When marriages face crisis, when abuse violates the covenant, when divorce becomes necessary, and how to rebuild with faith intact. The complete transcript is available at www.reflections313.com.
So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyyaka na'budu wa المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is the third and final session of in our three-part Fatimiyyah 2025-1447 series titled Wilayah in the Home, focusing on marriage and family and based on the Quran, the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, and the guidance drawn from the teachings of Imam Khamenei and other senior scholars. As with our explorations into subjects like the art of supplication, the lantern of the path, or the Tabyin series, which was for Ashura and Arba'een of this year of 2025-1447, it is strongly recommended that everyone engage with the previous sessions prior to consuming this current one. This is due to the cumulative nature of our discussion. The manner of discourse really does require that each part build upon foundations laid in the ones that came before. Proceeding sequentially helps avoid confusion, misunderstanding, or invalid assumptions, ensuring we are moving towards clarity on these vital matters. While this session will include a brief recap, it is extremely summarized. And to grasp the full context and nuance of our previous discussions on establishing the foundation and nurturing the relationship, engaging with, studying, and reflecting upon them is truly essential. Therefore, while at times these discussions might feel overly detailed or lengthy, the subject matter is profoundly important. We require and request patience and encourage everyone to be patient through to the end, following the progression of the series for maximum benefit. God willing, this journey will illuminate the path towards building stronger, God-centric families. If I can get a loud salawat, we can move on to the recap of the previous session, which is titled The Unfolding Tapestry, Weaving a Life of Love and Purpose.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So in our second session, we moved from the foundations of marriage to the active process of weaving the tapestry of a shared life. We began by clarifying that mawadda, or love, is not a passive Hollywood-esque emotion, but rather it is an active daily commitment. It is an active verb. We established that the soil for this love is trust, a two-way street that must be earned, not just demanded. We explored the idea of libas, or garment, that metaphor, clarifying that while it commands concealment of faults, it provides a divine license and even an obligation to seek help for harm or darar, or oppression, dhulm, distinguishing between sinful gossip and necessary consultation. From there, we clarified the divine pattern of roles, rescuing them from cultural distortion. We understood that the husband's role as qawwam, a responsible protector, provider, not a dictator, and the wife's honored role as rayhana, a cherished flower, and mudir, the internal manager of the home, is not, she is not a qahramana, a servant, slave. We addressed the fiqhi, or jurisprudential limits of authority, emphasizing that in a healthy marriage, communication and mercy, rahmah, not legal technicalities, are the guiding principles, or should be. We then discussed the balanced weave of a woman's life, affirming her irreplaceable primary role as a mother and wife as her highest jihad, while also confirming her Islamic right to education and social participation, provided the primary foundation is not compromised. We tackled conflict, established what we call sazigari, mutual accommodation, as the key to longevity, while drawing a hard red line against dhulm, or abuse, which we clarified is bidirectional and universally forbidden or haram. Finally, we celebrated the fruits of the tapestry, the sacred duty of tarbiyyah, nurturing. We affirmed the mother's irreplaceable role and the father's duty as a friend and guide. More importantly, we compassionately addressed the profound test of infertility, reframing it as a divine decree of the all-knowing, not a punishment, and we explored the honorable paths of sabr, patience, kafala, guardianship, and spiritual parenthood for the ummah. We have now learned how to lay the first stitch and how to weave the main body of the tapestry. But what happens when the threads snap? What happens when dhulm is not rectified, when sazagari accommodation fails, when the damage seems too great? This brings us to our final and most difficult session, Mending the Tapestry, Trials, Trust, and Turning to God. We must now, with the same commitment to tabyin and rahmah, clarification and compassion, address the painful realities of breakdown, the Islamic pathways for mediation, and if necessary, dissolution or divorce, and the spiritual tools for recovery, resilience, and turning back to God. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the main session, which is titled Wilayah in the Home, Mending the Tapestry, Trials, Trust, and Turning to God.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So the first point is diagnosing the tears, internal and external pathologies. Before we begin this difficult diagnosis, we must clarify our intention with the utmost of compassion. This exploration of why a marriage may falter is not intended to assign blame or to look back with judgment. Our purpose is not to say, I told you so. Rather, it is to find a cure. In order to do that, we must first have the courage to diagnose the illness. We are guided by the example of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, whom Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, described as the ultimate physician of the soul, a healer who did not wait for the sick to come to him, but actively sought them out to offer remedy. Imam Ali says, he describes the Prophet as, he was a physician, itinerant with his medicine, who had perfected his ointments and heated his instruments. And the references, like with all of these sessions, are in the write-up. I strongly encourage everyone to review them. Our approach in this session must be the same, to diagnose these deep, painful wounds, not to condemn or single out anyone, but to understand. Our goal is to seek the correct Shari'i remedies, find practical solutions, and where a complete fix is not possible, find the divine strength and guidance to cope. This is a path of healing, and it begins with an honest, compassionate diagnosis. A tapestry woven with rotten thread will unravel, no matter how beautiful the pattern. Many marital breakdowns are not sudden events. They are inevitable results of foundational pathologies, sicknesses of the soul that were present from the beginning, but were ignored, concealed, or misunderstood. Let's now look at the flawed first stitch, when internal pathologies unravel the bond. The most resilient tapestry cannot survive if its core threads are diseased. These internal pathologies, often stemming from issues we warned against in our very first session on this subject, are the primary cause of a bond unraveling from within. Let's look at pathology 1, unresolved addictions and media fantasies. In our first session, we issued a stark warning against the digital poison of pornography and the false expectations set by the media. When an individual enters marriage while captive to these influences, the first stitch is already broken. Hollywood or Bollywood or pornography-driven expectation of intimacy is a fading print on the fabric, not the thread itself. It creates a distorted view of human relations that the sacred real-world mawadda or love of marriage cannot and should not compete with. This addiction starves the real relationship of the affection and mercy it needs to survive, becoming a primary driver of emotional neglect and breakdown. It is the very embodiment of the lifestyle Imam Khamenei warned against. Imam Khamenei says, the inner reality of Western culture consists of the same materialistic, lustful, sinful, identity-erasing, anti-spiritual, and spirituality-hating lifestyle. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. The tragedy is not just the addiction itself, but the deception of entering marriage while concealing it. A spouse discovering this hidden pathology feels a double betrayal, both by the addiction and by the concealment. This is why the courage of honest disclosure before marriage, paired with a genuine commitment to recovery, is absolutely essential. Let's look at pathology 2, narcissistic traits and profound emotional neglect. A marriage can also unravel when one partner, particularly one exhibiting traits of profound narcissism or self-obsession, is incapable of fulfilling the most basic duties of the covenant. In our second session, we learnt that spouses are like a libas, or garment, for each other, tasked with protecting, adorning, and concealing each other's faults. We learnt that God places rahmah, mercy, between them. The narcissistic or emotionally neglectful spouse violates this entirely. They are not a libas. They are an abrasive force that exposes faults and inflicts wounds. They cannot show rahmah or mercy because their focus is entirely on the self. For them, the spouse is not a rayhana, a cherished flower to be cared for, but rather an object to be used. This pathology is a profound act of dhulm, of oppression, creating the oppressive dungeon that we will discuss later. This pathology manifests not only in clinical narcissism, but in the everyday emotional abandonment that occurs when one spouse consistently prioritizes work, hobbies, friends, or even religious activities over their partner's emotional needs. The spouse who is married to their job, or who uses even prayer as an escape from marital responsibility, is committing this form of neglect. As Imam Khamenei clarified the hadith, she is a flower, not a foreman. This hadith forbids this dynamic of servile, objectified use. Imam Khamenei says, a woman is a flower, a rayhana, not a chambermaid, a qahramani. A woman is a flower. How does one interact with a flower? Qahramana means chambermaid, manager of affairs, a foreman, meaning do not consider the woman in your house as your chambermaid, as your manager of affairs. The reference, of course, is in the write-up. Now we move on to pathology number 3, pathological neglect of deen, or faith. Finally, the first stitch is fundamentally flawed when the core intention, serving God, is absent or abandoned by one partner. We establish that this is a theocentric union, a sacred covenant, mithaq qalid, with God as the unseen third. When one spouse pathologically neglects their deen, abandoning prayer, engaging in haram, adopting purely materialistic worldviews, they are not just breaking a personal habit. They are unilaterally severing the covenant. They have removed God from the equation, therefore destroying the entire foundation of Wilayah within the home. The tapestry, having lost its central anchor, inevitably tears apart. Let's now move on to the second point, which is the third peg, the pathologies of external interference. While internal pathologies rot the threads of the tapestry from within, external forces can truly rip it apart. A marriage is a sacred covenant between two people and God. When external forces begin to interfere, the couple's first defense must be their united front. A conscious decision to face pressures together rather than allowing them to divide. Without this unity, the marriage becomes vulnerable to every wind, every external wind. When a third party, be it a parent, an in-law, a sibling, or even a friend, inserts themselves into this sacred space with a sense of entitlement or control, they act as a third peg, stretching the fabric of the marriage to breaking point. Let's look at pathology 1 from the external ones: interference as control, overbearing parents, and in-laws. This is one of the most common and destructive pathologies. It occurs when parents or in-laws refuse to respect the new independent family unit. They may interfere in decisions, criticize a spouse, or demand a level of time and emotional energy that rightly belongs to the new marriage. This often manifests as malicious gossip, what we call namima, carrying tales from one spouse to the other, or from a spouse back to the extended family, poisoning the well of trust. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, identified those who engage in this as among the most evil of people. Prophet Muhammad said, "Shall I not inform you of the most evil among you?" People said, "Yes, O Messenger of God." He replied, "Those who go about with malicious gossip, those who cause separation between loved ones, and those who seek to find fault with the innocent." And the reference, of course, is in the writer. When a parent, in-law, or sibling engages in behavior that is actively causing separation between the husband and wife, they are committing a grave sin, not exercising a familial right. Let's look at the second pathology, betrayal of trust versus Islamic brotherhood, inappropriate friendships. This pathology is often misunderstood, and clarification is therefore essential. Islam does not condemn friendship, it commands brotherhood and sisterhood. The believers are a single body, described by the Quran as brothers and allies of each other, ikhwa and awliya. The ideal of trust in this brotherhood is so absolute that Imam as-Sadiq described it thus, saying that he be his brother in all things, to the point that if he puts his hand into his brother's pocket and takes what he needs, his brother does not prevent him. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. Therefore, having friends is not the problem. It is a blessing and a virtue. This pathology arises when a spouse betrays the sacred marital covenant under the guise of friendship. The fault is not with the friend, it is with the spouse's behavior. The blame lies when the husband or wife, who is secretive with their phone, for example, engages in inappropriate emotional intimacy, or behaves in a way that causes valid suspicion. They have betrayed the marital amana, or trust. They have violated the command of Imam Ali to be aware of positions of accusation. And this is precisely the point Imam Khamenei stresses, that the prerequisite for trust is protecting the boundaries of the relationship. He says, the prerequisite for trust in the family is protecting the boundaries of men and women. The references, of course, are in the writer. A spouse who fails to protect these boundaries is the one creating the pathology. They are engaging in behavior that Imam Khamenei identifies as the very foundation of the crisis. He says, incorrect interaction is a foundation for jealousy and suspicion. And he has explicitly and repeatedly advised both spouses to avoid the very actions that provoke this jealousy, as it is a poison that burns the foundations of love from the root. He warns that once the seed of suspicion is planted, the damage is done, regardless of whether the suspicion was factually correct or not. Imam Khamenei says, I always advise young men, do not do an action or say a word that compels your wives to jealousy. I also advise young women in their interactions with men, with strange men rather, do not do an action or say a word that provokes the feeling of jealousy and zeal of their husbands. These jealousies bring about suspicion, what we call badbini, and weaken the foundations of love and burn it from the root. References are all in the write-up. Imam Khamenei continues, in the end, if suspicion appears, whether it has a correct documented basis or not, unfortunately, it will have its effect. It is crucial to clarify what healthy Islamic brotherhood and sisterhood looks like. Interactions are transparent, boundaries are clear, and the spouse's comfort is prioritized. It is the colleague who mentions their spouse in conversations, the friend who includes both spouses in invitations, the community member who maintains professional distance while offering genuine support. This is the beautiful balance Islam teaches, maintaining warm community bonds while protecting the sanctity of marriage. Let's now have a clarification, a tabyin on honoring parents versus sabotaging a marriage. The most sensitive and common form of external interference comes from parents and the extended family. The relationship between honoring one's parents and protecting one's marriage is one of the most difficult balances to strike, and it is a primary area where cultural traditions often clash with divine law. Let's look at the Quranic mandate, the paramount duty of ihsan, or kindness. The duty of what we call birr al-walidain, which is kindness to parents, is not an optional thing. It is a foundational pillar of Islam, second only to Tawheed, monotheism, or the unity of God. The Quran places it at the highest level of obligation. In Quran, Surah Al-Isra, the chapter of the night journey, 17th chapter of the Quran, verse 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and your Lord has decreed that you not worship except Him, and to parents good treatment, whether one or both of them reach old age while with you. Say not to them so much as uff, and do not repel them, but speak to them a noble word. This command for ihsan, a higher standard than mere justice, it is goodness, kindness, and excellence, is absolute. This kindness is due to both sets of parents from both spouses. However, this duty has one and only one shar'i or legal limit. Let's look at the divine limit. No obedience in disobedience. The duty of kindness and respect is unwavering, but the duty of obedience is conditional. It ends precisely where the command of God begins. If a parent orders a child, married or unmarried, to do something that is haram, forbidden, or to neglect something which is wajib, an obligation, obedience to them, to the parent, is forbidden. The Prophet and Imam Ali both established this non-negotiable principle, saying, there is no obedience to a creature in disobedience to the Creator. And the reference, of course, is in the writer. Let's now look at the forbidden haram act of sabotaging the covenant. This brings us to the core conflict. When a parent's advice or demands cross the line into actively sabotaging their child's marriage, it ceases to be parental right and it becomes an act of sin or ma'siyah. This interference is a grave pathology, whether it comes from the husband's family or the wife's. It is namima, it is malicious gossip. It is acting as one of those who cause separation between loved ones, which the Prophet called one of the most evil acts in the hadith we mentioned earlier. So let's look at the first pathology in this, undermining the rayhana or the wife. This occurs when a husband's family refuses to see the wife as the honored rayhana or cherished flower and mudir, manager of her own home. They may treat her as a qahramane, a chambermaid, a servant. They may criticize her and pressure their son to exert tyrannical authority upon her. That is haram. A son who obeys his family in committing this oppression, this dhulm, against his wife, is obeying a creature in disobedience to the Creator. His wife has shari'i rights, rights of nafaqah, kindness, respect, that his parents cannot override. His duty as a qawwam, a protector, extends to protecting his wife from the dhulm or oppression even of his own family. This is a very important point. Let's look at the second pathology, undermining the qawwam or the husband. This destructive interference is, of course, not limited to one side. The same pathology occurs when a wife's family, parents, siblings, aunties, interfere by telling her, he can't ask you to do that. You don't have to listen to him. By doing so, they are inciting her to rebellion and undermining the husband's God-given role as qawwam, a role of legitimate external leadership and provision. Unless the husband is commanding a sin, this interference is a haram act of sabotage, directly opposed to the Sharia. Let's now look at the independent unit, a united front. In both cases, these interfering parties are sinning. When two people marry, they form a new independent family unit. While they remain children to their parents, their primary covenant is now with each other and with God, of course. The couple must learn to communicate, form a united front, and protect their sacred space. Let's now look at the jihad of sincere advice when help is not harm. This does not mean that parents and family can never give advice. Islam is built on mutual support and sincere advice, what we call nasiha. The Quran commands us to enjoin upon each other the truth. The critical difference lies in the intention and the method. Interference is self-serving. It seeks to control, to impose one's will, or to validate one's own ego. Pious guidance, nasiha, is selfless. Its only goal is islah, reconciliation, and moving the couple closer to God. Often interference is disguised as help from a position of incomplete knowledge. A parent hears one side of the story and in a rush to defend their child offers advice that is in fact destructive. This is a violation of the Quranic principle of tabayyun, or verification. In Quran, Surah Al-Hujurat, the chapter of the chambers, 49th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who have believed, if there comes to you a disobedient one with information, investigate. While a child is not a fasiq, a disobedient one, the principle holds, acting on incomplete, one-sided information is dangerous. Pious advice must be given with hikmah, with wisdom, and maw'idat al-hasana, beautiful admonition. Imam Khamenei provides the perfect model for this. When a spouse complains to an elder, the elder's job is not to reinforce that ill-speaking. Their duty is to become an agent of Islah. Imam Khamenei says, God forbid that the elders should allow one of the spouses to come to them and speak ill of the other, and then they, the elders, reinforce that ill-speaking. Let them, the couple, become intimate with each other and connect their hearts. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. The truly loving parent or relative is a support scaffold, not a third peg. They provide strength to help the new independent union set its foundation, and then wisely step back, allowing the couple to stand on their own, bound together in their covenant with God. Let's now look at the idea of one home, two households, the crisis of infringed intimacy. This discussion of interference leads us to a specific and common living arrangement that institutionalizes this pathology, the practice of the newly married couple moving in with one set of the parents. While sometimes born of economic necessity, this arrangement often creates a crisis of one home, two households. First of all, let's look at the violation of sakina or tranquility. In our first session, we established the Quranic purpose of marriage, which is, as announced by Allah, by God in Quran, in Surah Al-Rum, the chapter of the Romans, the 30th chapter of the Quran, verse 21, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and of his signs is that he created for you spouses from amongst yourselves, so that you may find rest in them, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, and he put between you affection and compassion. Most surely there are signs in this for a people who reflect. This sakina is the peace and repose that comes from forming a new independent sanctuary. As Imam Khamenei explains, this is the very definition of a family. Imam Khamenei says, family in Islam means the place of residence, sukunat, for two people, the place of psychological tranquility for two people, the place of intimacy for two people with each other, the place for one person to find perfection by means of the other. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. When the couple lives under the roof of another established household, this sacred privacy is fundamentally infringed. The couple is never truly alone. They are long-term guests, unable to establish their own rhythm, their own rules, or their own intimate space. This constant infringement is the very antithesis of sakina. Let's look at the one man of the house conflict, which is undermining the qawwam. This arrangement creates an immediate and unavoidable conflict of wilayah, authority. In Islam, the husband is designated as the qawwam of his own family, its protector and provider. Quran, Surah An-Nisa, chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse number 34, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, men are the protectors and maintainers, qawwamun, of women. As Imam Khamenei explains, this means the supervision of the family's affairs is the responsibility of the man. We've covered this in depth. Imam Khamenei says, the Quran says, men are the protectors and maintainers, qawwamun, of women, meaning the supervision or sarparasti of the family's affairs is the responsibility of the man. The man must go to work. The livelihood of the family is his responsibility. When a married man lives in his father's house, he is not the qawwam, his father is. This undermines his God-given role, creating tension and preventing him from maturing into the leader of his own family. His wife, in turn, is left in a state of confusion, unsure of who holds the final responsibility for her protection. Let's now look at the crisis of the rayhana, infringed management. This pathology is just as severe when the couple lives with the wife's parents. In this scenario, the husband's role as qawwam is equally undermined, as he is a guest in his father-in-law's home. Simultaneously, the wife's own role is compromised. In the previous session that we had, the second session, we established her honored place as the mudir, or the internal manager, and the kadbanu, or the lady of the house. But when living in her mother's home, she is not the mudir. Her mother is. She cannot manage her own kitchen, her own home, her own space. She's in effect demoted from being a rayhana, a cherished flower, to a subordinate, creating a rift where she feels her privacy and intimacy is constantly being infringed. So let's now look at the path of wisdom, proximity, not cohabitation. This is why the path of wisdom, wherever possible, is independence. The couple must form their own home, for their own what we call sakan. This does not mean abandoning parents, not at all. It means fulfilling the wajib of birr al-walidain, or kindness to the parents, from a position of strength and independence. The couple should strive to live where they can visit their parents often, have dinner with them at least once a week, take them shopping, take them out, be friendly with them, be close to them, thereby fulfilling the duty of ihsan without sacrificing the wajib of protecting their own marital sanctuary. Let's now look at an Islamic mandate for privacy, even in extended families. Here we must offer a crucial clarification. We understand that for many, due to powerful economic reasons or deep-rooted cultural norms, living in an extended family home is the reality. This guidance is not intended to condemn those who have no other choice or even make an active choice to do this. Rather, it is to clarify that the couple's need for their own private space and spiritual sanctuary is not a modern or Western idea. It is a sacred Islamic mandate. The sanctity of the private home is established by God Himself in the Quran, where He forbids entry without permission. In Quran, Surah An-Nur, the chapter of the light, 24th chapter of the Quran, verse number 27, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who have believed, do not enter houses other than your own houses until you have sought permission and greeted their inhabitants. This verse establishes the external sanctity of a home. God then establishes the internal sanctity, commanding that even children and servants must seek permission at 3 specific times. Again, in Quran, in Surah An-Nur, chapter of the light, 24th chapter of the Quran, verse 58, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, let those whom your right hand possesses and those who have not yet reached puberty amongst you ask permission of you at 3 times, before the dawn prayer, and when you put aside your clothing at noon, and after the night prayer. The exegesis or tafsir of this verse is unambiguous. Allama Tabatabai in Tafsir al-Mizan explains the divine reasoning, or what we call the ilal, for this law. Allama says, and these are the times of seclusion, or what we call khalwa, and removing clothes. So in them is the likelihood of private parts, or the awra, being uncovered. Therefore the sublime God commanded even non-adult children and servants to seek permission in these 3 times. And the reference is in the write-up. The logic here is powerful. If God commands children living inside the home to seek permission before entering their parents' private space during these times of undress and seclusion, it establishes an undeniable Shari'i right for the couple to have a private space. This divine law implicitly forbids any family member, sibling, parent, or in-law from barging in unannounced. This is not just a spiritual or cultural matter. It is a matter rooted in fiqh, in jurisprudence. As part of the wajib, obligatory nafaqa, what we call maintenance, a husband is required to provide a maskan, a dwelling for his wife. The maraji, all of our maraji in fact, and using the example of, for example, Sayyid Sistani, have explicitly detailed this right, stating that a wife is not obligated to live in a shared home if it causes her what we call haraj, or hardship. Sayyid Sistani says, it is not permissible for the husband to house the wife in his dwelling place with his family, such as his mother or his sister, for example, in a way that causes her harm or places her in constriction or hardship, unless she had stipulated this upon him or she consents to it after the contract. Yes, if he prepares for her an independent dwelling within his house, such that she is independent in its facilities and there is no constriction upon her from his family, this is sufficient. Reference, of course, is in the write-up. The fiqh over here is quite clear. The wife's right to an independent space, one free from haraj or hardship and from constriction caused by others, is her shari'i right. An infringed intimacy where she has no sakan, no peace, or setr, covering, is precisely this form of hardship. The home is a sanctuary. As Shaykh Ali Raza Panhayan has often taught, the sanctity of the home must be preserved, as it is the primary place of tranquility. Ghaib Panhayan, he says, the home is the place of tranquility, not the place of tension and spiritual or emotional harm. The sanctity or hurmat of the home must be preserved. The pathology, therefore, is not the extended family. It is the violation of this God-given Quranic right to privacy. While the extended family lifestyle is less common today, the principle endures. The couple's covenant requires a sacred private space to flourish, and it is the duty of the entire extended family to respect and protect that sanctuary. In the large traditional family compounds of the past, or in fact in some parts of the world to this day, this Islamic principle was often better understood than in small modern apartments. While a patriarch might be the qawwam of the entire compound's external security, and the women might work together to bring sakina to the communal areas, it was understood that each family unit had its own private quarters. Within those private quarters, the husband and wife were their own qawwam and rayhana, respectively. Their space was inviolable. The pathology we are diagnosing, the crisis of infringed intimacy, occurs when this Quranic and fiqhi jurisprudential mandate for privacy is violated. It happens when a door is not knocked on, when a family member enters a couple's private room without permission, or when the couple has no space at all which they can call their own. While the extended family lifestyle, as I've said, is less common, this principle does apply and it endures. The couple's covenant requires a sacred, private place to flourish, and it is the duty of the entire extended family to respect and protect that sanctuary. In the same way that interference from parents can tear the tapestry from one side, an over-reliance on them can unravel it from the other, creating the subtle but damaging pathology of proxy parents. Let's now look at the honored guest versus the proxy parent, the sacred role and limits of grandparents. Just as interference from parents can unravel the tapestry, so too can an over-reliance upon them. This creates a different, more subtle pathology that we will call the proxy parent. First of all, let's look at the honored role, grandparents as a barakah, as a blessing. Let's be very clear. In Islam, parents and grandparents are a profound source of barakah or blessing. They are the roots of the family tree, and their homes are often sanctuaries of mawaddah and wisdom, of love and wisdom. The Holy Prophet commanded us to show them reverence. Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad says, whoever honors an elder in Islam, God will grant him security from the terrors of the day of resurrection. The references are in the write-up. Their love for their children is a gift, a bonus of pure affection and a treat for the children. However, a blessing, when misused, can become a burden. Let's now look at the irreplaceable murabbi or nurturer. The pathology begins when the couple, whether out of convenience or cultural habit, abdicates their own sacred duty of tarbiyyah, nurturing, and outsources it to their grandparents. As we established in the previous session, the primary and irreplaceable murabbi or nurturer of the child is the mother. Her role rather, is not a job that can be delegated. It is a divine amana, a trust, and an unparalleled art. As Imam Khamenei explains, if as a woman you decide not to raise your children at home, no one else will be able to do this. Even a father cannot do this, let alone anyone else. This feat can only be accomplished by the mother. As for that employment outside the house, if you cannot do it, there'll be tens of people to take your place. Therefore, the priority must lie with the task that is irreplaceable. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. The father, as a qawwam, shares his duty by providing the safe, loving environment and acting as a guide and friend to his children. As Shaykh Panhayan has taught, the family is the primary place to struggle with the self and to grow. Panhayani says, Where is the most important arena for struggling with the self? The most important arena for struggling with the self is in the family. When parents hand their children over to proxy parents, they are not just avoiding a task. They are fleeing from their most important arena of spiritual growth. Now let's look at the triple burden pathology. This abdication of duty places a triple burden on all three generations. Firstly, a burden on the grandparents. They are forced into a full-time role they have already completed. They deserve to be the honored guests, not the primary caregivers. And this undue burden can exhaust them physically and emotionally. Secondly, let's look at a burden on the parents. The couple fails to develop their own tarbiyyah, their own child-rearing skills. They do not forge the deep, resilient bond that comes from the struggle of raising their child, as Sheikh Panhayan described. They remain emotionally and functionally immature. And thirdly, a burden on the children. The child is caught between two sources of authority. They receive inconsistent nurturing and discipline, which can lead to confusion and emotional insecurity. It is true, the grandparents will often say they love to raise and look after the children, and this love is pure and genuine. But that sincere love, when it facilitates an abdication of duty by the parents, must not be used as a justification to preclude the new parents from their own God-given path. The couple must walk the path of tarbiyyah themselves in order that they mature. They must learn from their own mistakes and forge their own bond. Their spiritual growth comes from this jihad, and they must not be prevented from it, even by the most well-intentioned and loving grandparents. This pathology extends to the couple who, even if living separately, treats the parents' home as a service, expecting them to regularly cook and clean for them. This is a failure of the husband to be a qawwam, a provider, and the wife to be a mudir, a manager of their own independent unit. It creates the same infringed intimacy and third peg feeling as living with parents as the couple has failed to truly leave the nest. The path of wisdom is one of ihsan, kindness to the parents, not reliance on them. The flow of service should actually be reversed. The young, strong couple should be taking their parents shopping, having them over for dinner, serving them, not burdening them. Grandparents are the cherished roots, but the parents are the trunk, and they must bear the responsibility of their own branches. Let's now look at our first lessons for the present, weaving boundaries of wisdom and mercy. Our diagnoses of these internal and external pathologies is not a mere academic exercise. It is a call to action. It teaches us that a marriage grounded in Wilayah must be a fortress, but a fortress built with wisdom and mercy, not stone and steel. The practical lesson for every couple, new or established, is the jihad of forming a united front. This means consciously deciding to become an independent, self-sufficient, and divinely oriented unit. It is the practice of navigating the treacherous currents of external pressures and internal weaknesses together. This united front requires the husband to fully embrace his role as qawwam, not as a dictator, but as the protector of the family sanctuary. This includes the difficult jihad of protecting his wife from the dhulm, the oppression, or undue interference of his own family, doing so with ihsan, goodness, and wisdom, not harshness. It requires the wife to embrace her role as the honored rayhana and mudir of the home, supporting her husband's leadership and protecting their sacred covenant from any interference that seeks to undermine it, whether from her family or his. This unity is not built by walling off the world or but rather by establishing clear, loving, and shari'i boundaries. It means learning to communicate with each other first, resolving issues between yourselves before they fester or become public property. It is the wisdom to filter well-intentioned but harmful help from genuine nasiha, or sincere advice, that seeks islah or reconciliation. It is the courage to honor one's parents deeply, while lovingly but firmly resisting any action that constitutes a sin, be it namima or gossip, incitement or sabotage. Building this fortress of mutual trust, privacy and shared purpose is the first and most critical test of a couple's commitment to wilayah in the home. Let's now look at our first call to clarify, clarifying the sacred from the social. We must ask ourselves and clarify for our communities, what are the true roots of marital breakdown? Let us clarify that while external pressures are real, many breakdowns begin with internal pathologies. We must clarify that entering marriage while hiding addictions, narcissistic traits, or a fundamental lack of deen or faith is a deception that poisons the first stitch of the covenant. We must also clarify the Shari line between the wajib duty to honor parents and the haram forbidden act of interfering in or sabotaging a marriage. Let us clarify for all parents and in-laws that their role is to be a source of islah or reconciliation and barakah, blessing, not namima, gossip, or tafraqa, division. Let us clarify for husbands that their duty to their parents never includes permission to be unjust to their wives, and for their wives that their duty to their parents never includes permission to undermine their husbands. We must clarify that the couple's right to a independent, private dwelling free from hardship is a fiqhi right. It is not just a Western luxury. Let us clarify that the Quranic principles of privacy are the foundation of a healthy home, even within an extended family. And finally, let us clarify the sacred role of grandparents. They are an honored source of blessing, not a proxy service for parents to abdicate their own jihad of tarbiyah. We must clarify that the couple must walk their own path of raising their children, as this is their primary arena for spiritual growth, and that this duty must not be set aside, even by the most loving and most well-intentioned of grandparents. Please give me a salawat, and we move to the Quranic mandate for mending, mediation, and its betrayal.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
اللهم
محمد.
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So in our previous session, we undertook the painful but necessary diagnosis of the pathologies that tear at the marital tapestry. We looked at the internal sicknesses of the soul and the external attacks of interference that can unravel a family. But Islam is not a brittle system. It does not merely command us to be perfect and then abandon us when we falter. For the believer, there is no "I told you so." There is only the compassion and divine methodology for healing. When the threads of mawadda and rahmah are torn, when a breach appears, God himself provides the blueprint for islah, reform or reconciliation, a sacred structured process for mending, reconciliation, and returning to him. Let's now look at the divine ideal for islah or reconciliation, appointing the two hakam or arbitrators. When the foundation of a home is shaken by a deep breach, what we call a shiqaq, between the spouses, the first recourse is not dissolution, but rather it's divine mediation. The Quran provides the exact command. In Quran, Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse number 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "And if you fear a breach between the two, appoint an arbitrator," what we call a hakam, "from his people and an arbitrator from her people. If they both desire reconciliation, islah, God will bring harmony between them. Indeed, God is all-knowing, all-aware." This verse establishes a sacred, structured process. The divine wisdom in appointing one from his people and one from her people ensures balance. Each spouse has an advocate who understands their context, yet both advocates must transcend partisanship to seek God's goal of islah or reconciliation. This is the divine model, balanced representation united in purpose. The goal is stated explicitly and unambiguously, islah, which means reconciliation, mending, and setting things right. This is not a court for assigning blame. It is not a preliminary hearing for divorce. It is a divine process for healing. The hakam or arbitrator is therefore not a lawyer whose job it is to win the case for their client. The hakam is a wakil, an agent for mending. This is a profound and sacred amana or trust. In the same way as the wikala or agency system of Imam al-Hadi that we discussed in our regular Wednesday sessions was built on the absolute amana or trust of his deputies, these two arbitrators are entrusted by God with the trust or amana of a family's future. They are in that moment agents of the Sharia, tasked with the holy objective of islah or reconciliation. The divine promise in the verse is conditional if they both desire reconciliation. This shows that the process requires a pure and sincere niyyah, intention, from the couple themselves. The arbitrators are not there to impose a solution, but rather to facilitate the couple's own good faith desire to mend the covenant. This is the divine ideal, a path of mercy intended to save the sacred unit of the family. Let's now look at a betrayal of the wikala, the corrupt mediator as the corrupt agent. The divine ideal of the hakam, or arbitrator, is built on one non-negotiable principle, that of amana or trust. The arbitrator is a wakil, an agent, entrusted with the most sacred property a couple possesses, their covenant, their home, and the future of their children. To betray this trust is a monumental sin. It is a khiyana, a treachery, not just against the couple, but against God himself, who is the ultimate witness to this covenant. The Holy Quran warns us in the most severe terms about this specific betrayal. In Quran, Surah Al-Anfal, the chapter of the spoils of war, 8th chapter of the Quran, verse 24, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O you who have believed, do not betray God and the Messenger or betray your trusts while you know the consequences." This verse perfectly describes the sin of the corrupt mediator. They are betraying their amana, trusts, knowingly, or going through gross negligence. As we explored in our study on Imam al-Hadi, the entire wikala agency, the wikala system, was built on this single principle of amana or trust. The wakil was the imam's hand, his voice, and his presence in the community. His authority was valid only as long as his amana or trust was intact. So what then is a corrupt wakil? It is the arbitrator who is biased, who is unskilled, has a vested interest, or is motivated by anything other than islah or reconciliation. It is the mediator who is identical to the false wukala or agents who plagued the imams, those who use their proximity to power for their own gain. The imams did not tolerate this type of treachery, and their response is our precedent. When a wakil becomes corrupt, he was not just dismissed, he was publicly denounced and cursed to protect the ummah from his poison. Imam al-Hadi himself, upon discovering the treachery of his agent, Faris ibn al-Hatim, issued a formal signed decree, a tawqi', as we've mentioned, to his followers, saying, "It is narrated that a tawqi', signed letter, came out to them from Abu al-Hasan, that's Imam al-Hadi. Do not go to Faris ibn Hatim. I have informed you, so shun him, and may God curse him." And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. This is the gravity of the sin. A mediator who betrays their amana, who fails to investigate dhulm or oppression, who is biased by family ties or financial gain, who is lazy or unskilled, is not merely failing at a task. Such a mediator is actively committing khiyana or treason. They are a corrupt wakil, a modern-day Faris ibn al-Hatim, and they are facilitating the destruction of a family that God himself commanded them to mend. Yet there exists a level of corruption that transcends mere incompetence or bias. While many mediators fail through weakness or ignorance, itself a grave sin when dealing with such sacred trusts, there are those whose betrayal is calculated and predatory. Let's now look at the predatory scholar on facilitating dhulm, oppression, and the sin of exploitation. The corrupt wakil is a tragedy, but there exists a documented pattern of betrayal far deeper and far more predatory. While specific cases must be handled with discretion to protect victims, the pattern itself must be exposed. The unscrupulous mullah, the mediator who does not just fail in their amana or trust, but who actively facilitates dhulm or oppression and preys on the vulnerable. This is the scholar, in inverted commas, who, when faced with a spouse's credible claim of abuse, ignores them. It is the mediator who accepts gifts, which in reality are bribes, to side with the wealthier or more powerful party, thereby becoming a paid accomplice to dhulm or oppression. This is the predatory agent who sees a vulnerable spouse trapped in an oppressive dungeon, and rather than offer her the shari'i key of release, exploits this spouse's desperation, in some cases that have been documented, perhaps even suggesting temporary marriage, mut'a, as a solution. This is not mediation. It is a monstrous exploitation of a soul in crisis. And these are not just tales. These are realities that are well known, but tragically never spoken about. And as a result, these horrific crimes are hidden. And people keep using the services of such corrupt wukala. Such an individual is not a hakam, an arbitrator, nor are they a wakil, an agent of the imams. They are in fact wolves in the clothing of sheep, masquerading as a shepherd. They are the walking embodiment of the warning given by Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq about the scholar whose loyalty is not to God, but to the dunya, the world. Imam al-Sadiq teaches us, when you see a scholar who is in love with his worldly life, then hold him in suspicion regarding your religion. For verily, everyone who loves something hoards what he loves. And the reference, of course, is in the writer. If this warning applies to a scholar's general love for the world, how much more severely must we hold in suspicion the scholar who is willing to trade the fate of a family, the tears of the oppressed, and the sanctity of his amana for a worldly advantage? Such an individual is not a mediator. They are a co-sinner with the oppressor. In such a case, it is important to clarify that speaking out does not fall into the realms of mindless backbiting against the so-called scholars who do this. Rather, this is precisely one of those instances where exposing the crimes of such individuals, even scholars, is not only permitted, but is in fact necessary. This is nahi anil munkar, the forbidding of evil of the highest order, meant to protect the community. If such criminals are not stopped, then they will continue their rampage. Countless homes have been destroyed by such unscrupulous people. And this is a blight on the entire community. Why? Because the family is the foundational unit, wahid al-bina'i, of a society. It is the core cell of the ummah. If the family, which is the very first school of tarbiyyah, nurturing, is fractured rather than repaired, then the community as a whole will ultimately collapse. Imam Khamenei identifies the family as the true cell of the social body, the health of which determines the health of the entire nation. Imam Khamenei says, the family, this is the true cell of the body of society. This is why the corrupt mediator's sin is not merely personal, rather it is societal. Every family destroyed through biased or predatory mediation sends ripples through the community. Children grow up witnessing injustice sanctioned by religious authority or perceived religious authority, potentially losing faith not just in mediators, but in Islam itself. The corrupt mediator therefore becomes guilty not only of destroying a marriage, but of causing societal fitna or strife and sedition, and driving people away from the true Islam or the deen. Let's now look at our lessons for the present. Seeking a true wakil, the duty of due diligence. These cautionary tales are not meant to make us despair. They are shari'i or legal warnings. If a family is a sacred trust, the mediator is its temporary guardian. Then the couple has a wajib, obligation of due diligence in selecting the guardian. This is not a passive process. We must distinguish between informal family intervention, where well-meaning relatives try to help, and the formal appointment of a hakam as described in the Quran. Hakam being arbitrator. While informal support has its place in minor disagreements, when a shiqaq, when a deep breach occurs, the formal process with qualified arbitrators becomes necessary. Confusing these two levels often leads to unqualified people handling situations far beyond their competence. We cannot simply choose an arbitrator based on a title, a turban, or a reputation for being easygoing. The role of a hakam, arbitrator, is a judicial one, and it demands the same core qualifications as a qadi, a judge in Islam. Those being ilm, knowledge, taqwa, piety, and adala, justice. This is not a new problem. The crisis of false agents was one of the greatest threats faced by our imams. As we described and we mentioned earlier in the study of the system of wakala, the agency system, Imam Ali al-Hadi did not ask his followers to blindly trust anyone who claimed to represent him. On the contrary, he actively warned them against corrupt agents, placing the duty of verification upon the community itself. He issued formal tawqi', signed decrees, signed letters against the impostor, as we mentioned earlier, Faris ibn al-Hatam, commanding his followers to abandon him. In this, the lesson is clear. The imams expected their followers to perform due diligence. Today, that duty falls upon us. A mediator who holds the fate of a marriage in their hands is acting as a wakil, an agent of the Sharia. We must therefore seek authentication or ijaza, permission, just as the believers did in the time of the imams. Our maraji, the jurists, are unequivocal that no one may act as an agent, especially in sensitive matters, without explicit, verifiable permission. Imam Khamenei, in his answers to inquiries, he's asked a question: is it permissible to take religious dues like khums from the people without permission from a marja? It is not permissible. The answer, it is not permissible, except after seeking and obtaining permission from the marja. This principle applies to all forms of agency. While this ruling specifically is about khums, the principle of amana or trust is the same. The mediator is an agent. We must ask, are they an agent of God or an agent of their own ego? The wajib of due diligence therefore means that we must seek an arbitrator known for their taqwa, God consciousness, their ilm, their knowledge of Islam, of the fiqh, of the family and such, and their adala, their proven justice and character. How do we verify this? We cannot rely on verbal ijaza or a mere title. As we learned from the Wikala system, the burden of proof is on the one who claims. And our maraji' have given us the exact methodology for this verification. When asked how one can be certain of a marja's agent, Ayatollah Sistani replied. He was asked, how is it possible to be certain of the marja's agents? The answer was, one must ascertain the agency or wikala through legally valid methods, such as personal knowledge or the testimony of reliable persons, those who are called thiqat, whom one trusts, or by seeing his written permission, stamped with the seal of his office. Reference, of course, is in the write-up. This is our duty. We must seek a mediator who is either personally known for their adala by the community's reliable people, thiqat, or who is formally authenticated by the Hawza or Islamic seminary, or the office of the marja. This is especially critical when the goal of islah, reconciliation, fails and the matter turns to dhulm, oppression. The person to be approached in such a dire situation is not some random turban-wearing scholar. Rather, he has to be the Hakim Shar, a religious judge. This is the form of legal authority. It is not a casual title. As said Sistani, Ayatollah Sistani defines it. He says the intended meaning of the religious judge, what we call Hakim Shar, in our fatwas is the fully qualified jurist mujtahid who meets the conditions for taqleed, except in some instances where the intended meaning is the most learned jurist who is aware of public affairs. References in the writer. This is the proper authority because they have the Shari'i power not just to advise, but to act and to enforce a solution, precisely as outlined in the fiqh for protecting an oppressed spouse. The ruling of said Sistani in this matter: if the husband harms his wife and mistreats her without any valid religious justification, it is permissible for her to present her case to the religious judge, Al-Hakim Shar. He will oblige the husband to live with her in an amicable manner. If that works, the matter ends. Otherwise, he will censor or discipline him as he deems appropriate. If that also does not work, she has the right to demand a divorce. If he, the spouse, refuses to divorce her, and it is not possible to compel him to do so, the Hakim Shar will pronounce her divorced. So this is not like some small situation, some small position. To choose an arbitrator blindly or based on convenience is to fail in our due diligence. It risks placing the sacred amana of our family into the hands of a charlatan, an impostor, and bypassing the very systems of justice our imams have established to protect us, and that which is now, in his absence, administered and managed by the Honorable Maraji and the Wali al-Faqih. Let's now have our call to clarifying the agent from the impostor. We have walked through the sacred process of mending and the tragic reality of its betrayal. Now we must ask ourselves and clarify for our communities: what is the true nature of Islamic mediation, and how do we protect this sacred trust? Let us clarify that the appointment of a hakam, an arbitrator, as prescribed in the Holy Quran, is a formal Shari'i function. It is not a casual chat with a family friend or a random elder. It is a sacred process with the explicit, divinely stated goal of islah, reconciliation, not a formality for dissolution. We must clarify that the mediator is a wakil, an agent, acting as a guardian of the most profound amana or trust a couple possesses, their covenant. As with the wikala system of Imam al-Hadi, this agent's authority is conditional upon their amana or their trust. An arbitrator who is biased, unskilled, or has a vested interest is not a hakam. They are a corrupt agent committing khiyana, treachery, against God and against the couple. We must clarify in the strongest possible terms that a so-called scholar or mediator who facilitates dhulm, oppression, who ignores credible claims of abuse, or preys on the vulnerable is not a guide. They are a scholar in love with this worldly life. And as our imams have warned, such a person must be held in suspicion regarding our belief, our deen, our religion. They are a co-sinner with the oppressor, and exposing their corruption is not ghibah or backbiting. Rather, it is wajib, it is an obligation to protect the ummah from their perdition. We must clarify that amana, trust, and adala, justice, are the non-negotiable, absolute conditions for any mediation. And finally, we must clarify the correct authority to approach for this amana. In cases of severe dhulm, oppression, or darar, harm, the correct authority is not just any well-meaning individual, but in fact it is the Hakim Shar, the religious judge, a true, qualified, and authenticated jurist and mujtahid who has the Shari'i authority to investigate, to censure, and if necessary, to enforce a divorce to release the oppressed. It is our wajib, our obligation, our duty of due diligence to seek these true agents and shun the impostors, just as the followers of the imams were commanded to do so. Let us also clarify that there are many sincere, qualified, and just mediators who embody the divine ideal of the hakam. Our warnings against corruption are not meant to create despair or distrust of all religious authority. but to protect the sacred institution of Islamic mediation from those who would corrupt it. When true agents of Islah are found, those with knowledge, piety, and justice, they should be sought out, they should be supported, and their wisdom should indeed be heeded. Please give me a salawat. We move to the next point, which is when mending fails, the gravity and fiqh of disillusion or talaq.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So we have now diagnosed the internal sicknesses and external attacks that can tear at the fabric of a marriage. We have also established the sacred Quranic mandate for Islah or reconciliation and warned against the corrupt agents who betray this trust. We now arrive at the most painful and sensitive part of our discussion. What happens when, despite all sincere efforts, the mending fails? What happens when the dhulm or oppression is persistent? The breach is too wide, and the sakan or tranquility has been irrevocably replaced by haraj or unbearable hardship. Here we must speak of disillusion. We must approach this topic with the immense gravity it deserves, for it is an act that God Himself despises. But we must also speak of it with clarity and compassion, to bring hope to those who feel trapped, and to dispel the cultural myths that surround it. So the first point, the most hated halal, divorce and the shaking of the throne of God. There is no ambiguity in the Islamic tradition about the spiritual weight of divorce. It is not a casual act, a simple uncoupling, or a lifestyle choice. It is a profound and seismic event, described by Prophet Muhammad as the single most detested of all permissible acts in the eyes of God. Prophet Muhammad has said, God has not made permissible anything more hated to Him than divorce. And the reference is in the write-up. The gravity is further emphasized in another tradition, where the act of divorce is said to shake the very foundations of the cosmos. It is not a private matter. It is an event with spiritual repercussions. The Messenger of God has said, marry and do not divorce, for indeed the throne, al-arsh, shakes from divorce. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. Why such a severe warning? Because we have discussed the family is not merely a social contract. It is the foundational brick of the ummah. As Imam Khamenei explains, the family is the cell of the societal body. He says, with this contract, we create a new cell in the body of society. For this body of society is formed from the cells of families. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. Divorce is the act of breaking that foundational brick. A single broken brick may seem insignificant, but it weakens the integrity of the entire wall. A society filled with broken homes is a fractured, weakened, and spiritually ailing society, vulnerable to collapse. This tragedy is compounded exponentially when children are involved. When the foundational brick of their world is broken, they are torn between two worlds. It is an act of dhulm, oppression against them, an almost inevitable consequence of the parents' separation, which is why Islah or reconciliation is so heavily and so mercifully stressed in the Quran and Islamic teachings. The pain inflicted upon the children is a wound that shakes the arsh, the throne of God itself. Yet, we must also clarify that sometimes remaining in a home filled with dhulm, oppression, and conflict inflicts even greater wounds upon children. Witnessing persistent abuse, living in constant tension, or seeing one's parent destroyed by oppression can damage a child's understanding of love, trust, and their own worth. In such cases, a peaceful separation, conducted with ihsan, may be the greater mercy for all involved. This is why disillusion must always be the absolute, final, and most reluctantly taken door, after every single path of mending has been exhausted. Let's now look at invalidating triviality. why the WhatsApp divorce is batil, it's void. Because divorce is so grave, the Ja'fari school of fiqh, or jurisprudence, the school of Ahl Bayt, protects the family with a fortress of legal requirements. Its goal is precisely to prevent disillusion based on temporary, trivial, or emotional outbursts. This is a profound tabyin, a clarification that distinguishes this school, the Ja'fari school, from all of the others. In the Ja'fari school, a talaq, a divorce, is considered batil, null, void, and of zero legal or religious effect, unless all of its strict conditions are met. This is a divine protection for the family. As the great scholar and martyr Ayatollah Murtada Mutahhari, may God rest his pure soul, explains, the fiqh of the Ahl al-Bayt is designed to make divorce as difficult as possible. The first condition is that of intention and will. The formula of divorce cannot be issued in a state of extreme anger, in a state of intoxication, or in jest. It must be a deliberate, conscious, and intended act. Shaykh Mutahhari highlights this crucial distinction. He says, Shia jurisprudence, contrary to other schools of jurisprudence of Islam, does not give any validity to a divorce which takes place in the state of anger. And the reference, of course, in the write-up. The second non-negotiable condition is that the divorce must be pronounced using the specific spoken Arabic formula. It cannot be written, it cannot be texted, and it cannot be implied. It must be spoken. Shaykh Mutahhari again says, in Shia jurisprudence, it is a condition that the formula of divorce must be pronounced in correct and explicit Arabic. Third, the wife must be in a state of purity. That is, she cannot be in her monthly period, the hayd. Shaykh Mutahhari again, in Shia law, it is a condition that at the time of divorce, the wife should not be in her monthly period. Finally, and perhaps most critically, these conditions must be verified. Therefore, the formula of divorce must be spoken in the presence of two just witnesses who hear the formula simultaneously. Shaykh Mutahhari again, in Shia jurisprudence, in contrast with the common jurisprudence of many of the schools of the Sunnah, the presence of two just witnesses is a condition for the validity of divorce. All of the references are in the write-up. The conclusion of this tabyin, this clarification, is a source of immense security for the family. It means that the 3 talaq text message, the WhatsApp divorce, or an angry, thoughtless shout of, I divorce you, in the heat of an argument, is religiously and legally meaningless. It is what we call batil, void or invalid. It has no effect. The couple remains married. This fiqh is a divine mercy, a cooling off period mandated by God, forcing deliberation and preventing the most hated permissible act from being trivialized by a moment of human weakness. Let's now look at the subject of the oppressive dungeon that we alluded to earlier, when disillusion becomes a divine mercy. There are times when the home, which God has intended as a second, a sanctuary of peace and mercy, mutates into something unrecognizable. It becomes a sijn, a prison, where the soul is suffocated and the heart is weighed down by the chains of persistent dhulm, be it abuse, degradation, belittling, or neglect. In such moments, the question arises, if divorce is so hated, why is it halal? Why would the most merciful permit the dissolution of what he himself has called a sign of his love and compassion? The answer lies in the very nature of divine mercy. God, in his infinite wisdom, knows that every union remains a sanctuary. Sometimes, despite every effort, a marriage becomes an oppressive dungeon, a place where the light of dignity and hope is extinguished. It is here that the door of talaq, divorce, is opened, not as a failure, but as a mercy, a rahmah for the oppressed soul. Imam Ali says in Nahj Balagha, It is not befitting for a woman to endure harm from her husband, nor is it befitting for a man to harm his wife. The sacredness of marriage is not in its mere endurance, but in the preservation of dignity, compassion, and justice. When a wife is subjected to persistent dhulm, whether through words that belittle, actions that degrade, or neglect that erodes her very sense of self, she is not called to sabr or patience that enables sin or destroys her soul. Rather, she is called to protect the trust God has placed within her, to seek liberation from oppression, and to remember that her worth is not measured by her ability to endure injustice. As Ayatollah Khamenei reminds us, he says, Islam has never compelled a woman to endure oppression. If a woman is subjected to injustice in her home, Islam has left the way open for her to free herself from that oppression. The reference is in the write-up. This is not a call to hasten towards separation at the first sign of difficulty. I repeat, this is not a call to hasten towards separation at the first sign of difficulty. Islam, in its wisdom, encourages reconciliation, patience, and mutual effort. But when the home becomes a dungeon, when the soul is crushed and the heart is wounded beyond repair, then divorce is not a defeat, it is a divine mercy. As Ayatollah Sayyid Mutahari writes, Islam has legislated divorce as an emergency solution, permissible in circumstances where the continuation of married life leads to oppression and injustice. The reference is in the write-up. To remain in such a marriage is not sabr. It is to enable sin, to allow the destruction of a human soul, and to betray the trust of the All-Merciful. Prophet Muhammad has said, there is no harm and no reciprocating harm in Islam. The scholars from the Hawza, from Qom to Najaf, have always emphasized that the sanctity of marriage does not override the sanctity of the individual soul. Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, he says, preserving human dignity takes precedence over everything, even over the continuation of married life. References in the write-up. Let us be clear. Let us be clear. Divorce in this context is not a failure. It is a necessary halal release from dhulm, permitted release from oppression. It is the hand of divine mercy, reaching into the darkness of the dungeon, unlocking the door and inviting the oppressed soul to step into the light once more. Having established when divorce transforms from a detested act to a divine mercy, we must now address one of the most damaging misconceptions plaguing our communities: the belief that women are powerless in seeking dissolution. I need to caveat, we are not saying go out and get divorced. This is not what the message of this session is. This is to give information. As I've said multiple times, the pathway is always to try and find islah, to try and find reconciliation. This is only for when things are impossible to reconcile. I need to make that very, very clear. This misconception that women are powerless in seeking dissolution, this distortion, has trapped countless sisters in oppressive situations, unaware that the Sharia itself has provided them with multiple keys to freedom. Let's now look at a clarification, a tabeen, on a woman's right to divorce. Part 1. Khul, Mubarat, and Wakala. At the very heart of the Islamic approach to marriage lies a profound commitment to islah, reconciliation, healing, and the restoration of harmony between the spouses. The Quran commands us in Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse number 35. If you fear a breach between them, appoint an arbitrator from his family and an arbiter from her family. If they both desire reconciliation, God will cause it between them. Prophet Muhammad has also said, the most detested of permissible things to God is divorce. This is accepted by both the Sunnah and the Shia, and the references are in the write-up. Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, reflecting the spirit of Ahl al-Bayt, emphasized, Islam regards divorce as an emergency solution and recommends that, as far as is humanly possible, the couple strive for reconciliation and the preservation of their shared life. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. These mechanisms for dissolution, khul, mubarat, and wakala, are not to be used lightly, nor are they a quick escape for those who are simply bored, restless, or facing the ordinary ups and downs of life. They are reserved for situations where all avenues of reconciliation have been exhausted, where real harm, real injustice, or irreconcilable aversion persists. As Ayatollah Shaykh Mutahari cautions, that someone should contemplate separation merely due to dissatisfaction or early boredom is not in harmony with the spirit of Sharia. One must strive as far as is possible for reconciliation and repair of the relationship. The distinction between ordinary difficulties requiring sabr and sazagari, or accommodation, mutual accommodation, versus destructive pathologies requiring intervention is crucial. Ordinary difficulties include disagreements about household management, temporary financial stress, personality differences that don't involve abuse, or the natural cooling of initial passion. Destructive pathologies include persistent verbal degradation, physical violence, deliberate emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, substance abuse that threatens family safety, or abandonment of religious obligations that undermines the covenant's very foundation. Only when the sacred trust of marriage has truly broken down and all sincere, genuine efforts at islah, reconciliation, have failed, do these rights and mechanisms become a mercy and a way out of oppression. Furthermore, in the discourse on divorce, a persistent misconception shadows many hearts that the power, in inverted commas, of divorce, talaq, is a sword held solely by the husband, suspended above the wife as a perpetual threat. This is a distortion of the Shari'i reality and a grave injustice to the spirit of Islamic law, which is rooted in mercy, justice, and safeguarding the dignity for both spouses. Let us now counter this notion of the sword of Damocles, the limits of authority. Islam does not grant the husband an unchecked, absolute authority over divorce. The Quran and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt establish very clear boundaries, checks, and rights for women, ensuring that marriage is never one-sided, that marriage is never a one-sided contract of power, but a mutual covenant of trust, love, mercy, and compassion. As Imam Ali has said, it is not befitting for a man to harm his wife, nor for a woman to endure harm from her husband. The right to seek release from an oppressive and intolerable marriage is not only recognized, rather it is protected in the Sharia. Let's now look at the first type of divorce, khul, or divestiture, a woman's right to request divorce. When a wife finds herself unable to continue the marriage due to deep-seated aversion, whether from her husband's character, his conduct, or other causes, Islam grants her the right to seek divorce through what we call khul. In this process, she offers to return her mahriyah, dawah, or more, as a means of release. The Quran states, in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verse 229, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "If you fear that they will not maintain the limits of God, then there is no blame upon either of them concerning that by which she ransoms herself." Ayatollah Khamenei further explains and clarifies, in khul divorce, if a woman is intensely averse to her husband and finds the continuation of life impossible, she may request divorce by returning her mahriyah or more, and it is recommended, mustahab, for the husband to accept. References are on the write-up. This right is not a mere formality. It is a living protection, ensuring that no woman is trapped in a marriage that has become a source of suffering. The next type is mubarat, or mutual release, when the dislike is mutual. There are times when both spouses find themselves unable to continue together, each harboring a mutual aversion. In such cases, Islam provides the path of mubarat, a divorce initiated by the wife with the husband's agreement, in which she may return less than her original dowry or mahriyah, Imam al-Sadiq educates us with clarity. Mubarat is when the woman says to her husband, I cannot bear living with you. And the man says, nor do I wish to be near you. So they separate, and the woman returns something less than her mahar. And the references are in the writer. This process too is a mercy, ensuring that neither party is forced to remain in a state of mutual misery. Next, you have the wakala, or stipulation, the power of attorney in the marriage contract. Islamic law, as championed by Shaykh Mutahari and Imam Khamenei, recognizes the right of a woman to have the right to divorce stipulated in her marriage contract as a wakala, as a power of attorney. This means that at the time of the aqd, the marriage contract, the husband can grant his wife the authority to initiate divorce on his behalf under agreed upon conditions. Shaykh Mutahari writes, in the marriage contract, it is permissible to stipulate that the wife, upon the occurrence of certain conditions, is authorized to divorce herself. Imam Khamenei likewise affirms, the woman has the right within the marriage contract to obtain the power of attorney for divorce from her husband. And the references are all in the write-up. This is not a loophole or a modern innovation, but a well-established principle in the fiqh of Ahl al-Bayt, and a means of ensuring justice and security for women in their most vulnerable moments. In all of these rulings, the spirit of Islam is very clear. The dignity, agency, and well-being of the women are never to be sacrificed. The power of divorce is not a weapon, but a trust, one that must be exercised with caution, justice, compassion, and above all, mercy, and only when absolutely necessary, as we've reinforced multiple times. Let's now have a clarification of Tabyin on a woman's right to divorce, part 2, the final door of the Hakim Shar, the qualified jurist. Having discussed the voluntary and mutual avenues of dissolution, we now return to the final recourse. When even mercy, dialogue, and every effort to reconcile have failed, the doors of justice must be opened by the hand of the Hakim Shar. The final safety net, the role of the Hakim Shar. Islamic law, in its wisdom and compassion, does not leave the oppressed without recourse. If a husband refuses to grant talaq or khul, and it is proven that he is oppressive, yani zalim or negligent, the wife is not abandoned to a life of suffering. She has the right to seek the intervention of a Hakim Shar, a qualified jurist whose duty it is to uphold justice and mercy when all other avenues have been exhausted. As we mentioned earlier, Sayyid Sistani explains what the Hakim Shar is. The intended meaning of the religious judge, the Hakim Shar, in our fatwas, in Sayyid Sistani's fatwas, and this is pretty universal across all of the maraji, is the following: the fully qualified jurist, mujtahid, who meets the conditions for taqleed, except in some instances where the intended meaning is the most learned jurist, who is aware of public affairs. References are in the write-up. And the Quran reminds us again, Surah An-Nisa, chapter of women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse number 35. If you fear a breach between them, appoint an arbiter from his family and an arbiter from hers. If they both desire reconciliation, God will cause it between them. But when reconciliation is no longer possible, the Hakim Shar becomes the final safety net, ensuring that no one is left to languish in an oppressive dungeon. Let's now have a look at the idea of judicial divorce, upholding justice when all else fails. If a wife can prove darar, significant harm, haraj, unbearable hardship, or abandonment, such as the husband's failure to provide nafaqah or maintenance, the Hakim Shar has the authority to issue a judicial divorce, talaq hukmi, which is valid even without the husband's consent. Sayyid Sistani rules, if the husband refuses to fulfill his marital duties or to provide maintenance and the wife cannot compel him, and continuing the marriage causes a great hardship, the Hakim Shar can grant her a divorce. The references are in the write-up. Imam Khomeini likewise has said, if a woman can prove her hardship before the Hakim Shar, the jurist can compel the husband to divorce. And if he refuses, the Hakim himself will issue the divorce. Imam Khamenei's position is the same. In fact, Ayatollah Khamenei and many other Maraji echo this principle, emphasizing that the Hakim Shar is not a mere bureaucrat. Rather, he is a guardian of justice and mercy, whose intervention is a last resort to protect the dignity and well-being of the oppressed. Let's now look at the social and pastoral wisdom of the Hakim Shar. The role of the Hakim Shar is not to break marriages, but to ensure that the sacred bond is never a tool of oppression. His intervention is a mercy for those who have exhausted every path of reconciliation and a safeguard against the misuse of power or neglect. Ayatollah Jawadi Amali writes, "The Hakim Shar is a refuge for the oppressed. His duty is to preserve justice and human dignity, even if it leads to separation." Let's now have a reflective reminder. Divine mercy never abandons the oppressed. In all of this, we must remember the mechanisms of the Sharia are not cold procedures, but are living manifestations of God's mercy and justice. Even when every door seems closed, the door of the Hakim Shar remains, a final assurance that no soul is left alone in the darkness of oppression. As the Quran promises, in Quran, Surah Fussilat, the chapter of the explained in detail, 41st chapter of the Quran, verse 46, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And your Lord is never unjust to his servants." Let's now look at releasing in kindness the Quranic command for dignity in parting. The journey of marriage, even when it must end, is never meant to descend into bitterness or humiliation. The Quran, in its unmatched wisdom, commands not only justice but beauty in conduct, even at the moment of separation. In Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, verse 229, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "A divorce is only permissible twice. After that, the parties should either hold together on equitable terms or separate with kindness." This is not a mere legal formality, but a spiritual and ethical command. Even in disillusion, the duty of ihsan, kindness, excellence, and generosity remains. The parties are called upon to uphold ma'ruf, good conduct, fairness, and dignity until the very last moment. The end of a marriage is not the end of respect, nor is it an excuse for cruelty or vengeance. Imam Ali reminds us, "If you must divorce, then do so with kindness, and if you must part, then do so with grace." References in the write-up. Imam Khamenei, echoing the Quranic spirit, writes, "Even in separation, dignity and good character must be preserved. This is the command of the Quran. Therefore, the believer is called to rise above ego and pain, to release with kindness, and to remember that every act, even parting, can be a reflection of divine beauty." Then you have the material trust, financial rights and responsibilities. The command for ihsan, excellence in separation, extends beyond emotions to encompass all material matters, for these too are a part of maintaining human dignity during the difficult transition. The Sharia establishes clear financial protections that must not be violated, even in the midst of emotional turmoil. The Mahriyyah becomes the absolute property of the wife upon the marriage contract itself. Sistani says, "The Mahriyyah becomes the property of the wife immediately upon the contract, and she has the right to demand it in full after consummation. In cases of regular divorce initiated by the husband, or when the separation is due to his fault or neglect, she retains this Mahriyyah in full. Only in the khul divorce that we spoke about earlier, where she herself seeks release and offers to return the Mahriyyah, or in Mubarat with mutual agreement, does she forfeit this right or a part of it. To pressure her into khul through dhulm, coercion, oppression, thereby forcing her to ransom herself with her own Mahriyyah, is a massive, grave injustice entirely condemned by Sharia. To withhold or contest this right is to add financial oppression to emotional wounds. Furthermore, during the iddah period of a revocable divorce, The husband's obligation of nafaqah, maintenance, continues in full. She remains entitled to housing, food, and all necessities as if the marriage were intact. Sistani says, the husband must provide maintenance for the wife during the revocable divorce waiting period. But there is no maintenance for one in the waiting period of an irrevocable divorce. This is not charity, but a divinely mandated right, ensuring that a woman is not left destitute while she observes the waiting period. For the children, the father's financial responsibility remains absolute, regardless of custody arrangements. Whether they stay with him or their mother, and that itself is another discussion, their maintenance, education, healthcare, clothing, and such needs remain his shari'i obligation until they reach the age of self-sufficiency. These are not mere legal technicalities, but are manifestations of the Quranic command to release with kindness. When a husband withholds these rights out of spite or uses financial pressure to force his wife to forfeit her mahriya or dowry in exchange for a khul, he transforms what should be a merciful release into a continued oppression. Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, has warned, beware of wronging one who has no helper against you except God. The woman who knows these rights stands in a position of dignity, not as a beggar, but as one claiming what God himself has guaranteed her. And the man who fulfills these obligations, even in the pain of separation, demonstrates true qiwama, not the authority of domination, but the nobility of maintaining justice even when the heart is terribly wounded. Let's now have a look at our lesson for the present, from the sword of Damocles to the key of release. The wisdom of the Sharia is not meant to remain locked in books or reserved for moments of crises. Its guidance is most powerful when it is known, understood, and lived before the trials of life arise. In our time, the greatest protection for both women and men is education, a clear, honest, and courageous teaching of rights, responsibilities, and the true spirit of the marriage covenant. First of all, women, knowledge as empowerment. Women must be educated about their shari'i rights before marriage, especially the power of stipulation or wakala in the marriage contract. Too often, ignorance or social pressure leaves women vulnerable, unaware that the Sharia itself has provided them with keys to dignity and security. Imam as-Sadiq has instructed us, saying, gain understanding in religion, for the one ignorant of God's rulings may fall into the forbidden without knowing. Ayatollah Mutahhari emphasizes, a woman's awareness of her shari'i rights is the greatest safeguard of her dignity and security. And now let's look at men, authority as trust. Men too must be educated that their role as qawwam, the maintainers and protectors of the family, is not a license for domination. Rather, it is a sacred trust. If a man betrays this trust with dhulm, with oppression, he forfeits his authority in the eyes of God and the law. The Quran declares, men are the maintainers of women. We've said this in Surah An-Nisa, chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 34. But this idea of maintainers is conditional upon justice, compassion, and the fulfillment of responsibilities. Imam Khamenei says, a man's qiwama means responsibility and trust, not domination and oppression. If a man oppresses his wife, he loses this authority. And the reference is in the write-up. Let's now look at the key of release. The sword of Damocles is replaced in the light of knowledge and justice by the key of release, a marriage built on mutual understanding, and if necessary, an exit that preserves dignity and faith. The future of our families depends on this education, this honesty, and this unwavering commitment to the spirit of the Sharia, under the guidance of the righteous scholars, the Maraji, and the Wali al-Faqih. Let's now look at after the storm, the path of healing and renewal. For those who have walked through this painful door, know that divorce is not the end of your story with God. The iddah period is not merely a legal waiting time, but a sacred space for healing, reflection, and reconnection with the divine. As Imam Sajjad teaches in his whispered prayer of the repenters, every ending can become a new beginning when we turn to God. Imam Sajjad says, "Does the runaway servant return to anyone but his master? Or can anyone grant him sanctuary from his wrath besides him?" The divorced person is not damaged or lesser. They are a soul who has endured a trial and emerged seeking God's vast mercy. For the community, our duty is not judgment, rather it is support, ensuring that neither the divorced woman nor the divorced man faces stigma or isolation. Islam encourages remarriage for both divorced men and divorced women, recognizing it as a path to renewed companionship and completing half of the faith anew. The Prophet himself married divorced women, elevating their status. Any cultural stigma against marrying divorced individuals contradicts prophetic example and perpetuates unnecessary suffering. And I'll call to clarify for this point, clarifying law versus culture. We must ask ourselves and clarify for our communities, what is the true nature of divorce in Islam? And how do we distinguish between the sacred law, Sharia, and the shifting sands of culture? Let us clarify unequivocally that any so-called divorce enacted outside the bounds of Shari'i procedure, such as by way of a text message, a casual declaration, or any process not witnessed and validated according to Islamic law, is batil. It's void, it's invalid, carries no legal or spiritual weight. A marriage cannot be dissolved on a whim, in a moment of anger, or as a cultural shortcut. The sanctity of the marital bond demands that its dissolution be approached with the same gravity, the same process, and the same intention as its formation was, if not more. We must clarify that Islamic law, in its mercy and wisdom, provides women with clear, accessible mechanisms to escape an oppressive marriage. These are not theoretical rights, but living protections, khul, mubarat, wakala, and when all else fails, the intervention of the Hakim Shara. To claim that Islam traps women in abuse is a distortion of both the law and the compassion of the Sharia. Let us clarify, once and for all, that patience or sabr in Islam never means enduring abuse, humiliation, or the destruction of one's dignity. Patience is a virtue in the face of life's ordinary hardships, not a command to remain silent in the face of dhulm or oppression. A marriage preserved through the endurance of abuse is not a victory for Islam. It is a betrayal of its spirit. We must clarify for our families, our communities, and ourselves. Islamic law is a shield. It is not a shackle. And culture must never be allowed to override the divine blueprint of justice, of mercy, and of dignity for every soul. Please give me a salawat, and we move on to the next point, which is reweaving the self, navigating grief, loss, and bereavement.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
There are seasons in every life when the fabric of our existence is tested by loss, when the familiar patterns unravel and we find ourselves standing at the edge of grief. Whether through the end of a marriage or the passing of a loved one, these moments of bereavement are among the most profound trials that any soul can face. Yet within the tradition of Islam, such experiences are not seen as mere endings, but as invitations to reweave the self, to gather the scattered threads of sorrow, patience, and hope, and to begin, with God's help, the slow and sacred work of healing. We will now explore the unique challenges and spiritual opportunities that arise when the tapestry of life is torn or cut, and how faith can guide us through the journey of loss. So first, the two losses, when the tapestry is torn, being divorce, versus when it is cut, death. There are moments in every life when the world as we know it is irrevocably changed, when the tapestry we've so carefully woven is either torn by the pain of separation or cut by the finality of death. These are the two great losses that visit the human heart: the end of a marriage through divorce and the end of a partnership through death. Both are moments that halt the rhythm of daily life. Both bring a silence that echoes through the entire home, a sense of absence that is felt in every corner. Whether the loss comes suddenly or after a long struggle, it leaves behind questions, memories, and a profound ache that words can scarcely contain. In our tradition, these experiences are not dismissed or minimized. The Quran and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them, acknowledge the reality of grief, the legitimacy of sorrow, and the need for healing. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, himself wept for his loved ones, and the Imams, peace and blessings be upon them all, taught that true patience is not found in the denial of pain, but in the way we carry it, turning to God, seeking meaning, and allowing the heart to mend in its own time. Divorce and death are not the same, yet both demand a reweaving of the self. Each calls us to gather the loose threads of our lives, to sit with our grief, and to begin slowly to create new patterns of hope and connection. In these moments, we are invited to remember that loss, however devastating. It is also a form of what we call ibtila, a spiritual trial, that if met with honesty and faith, can become a means of drawing closer to the Most High. As we enter this section, let us do so with gentleness, with ourselves and with others. Let us acknowledge the weight of these losses, honor the journey of mourning, and seek together the wisdom that our faith offers for navigating the long road of healing. So first, let's look at healing from divorce, reweaving the self after dissolution. Divorce leaves a silence that is unlike any other, a silence that hums not with absence alone, but with all the unspoken words, the prayers once shared, the memories that linger in the spaces of what once was. The breaking of a marital bond can feel like a small death, not of the body, but of a chapter of the soul. That moment, one stands before an empty loom, the tapestry of life interrupted. Yet Islam never leaves the believer abandoned before that silence. It offers a path forward, the sacred art of reweaving. The Quran reminds us that every hardship carries within it the seed of renewal. In Quran, Surah Al-Inshirah, the chapter of the relief, 94th chapter of the Quran, verse number 6, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." Ease, yusr, is not merely comfort after pain. It is the wisdom, the strength, and the refinement born through the trial itself. For those healing from divorce, this ease often begins with three immensely difficult, deeply transformative inner acts: forgiveness, patience, and trustful consultation. Let's have a look at the jihad of forgiveness, or af. Forgiveness is perhaps the hardest jihad a wounded heart will ever face. It is not the absolution of wrongdoing, nor is it the denial of pain. It is the deliberate choice to free the soul from the weight of resentment. Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "When you have power over your enemy, let your forgiveness be an act of gratitude for your strength over them." This is the af, the forgiveness as liberation. It is not for the sake of the other, but for one's own soul, to release oneself from the torment of reliving harm. Sheikh Ali Raza Panhayan often reminds that forgiveness is not forgetting the wound, but ceasing to let it define one's horizon. He says, "If you do not cleanse your heart of resentments and grudges, no act of worship will save you. A purified act becomes light and can ascend." To explain a little more simpler, what he is saying is, when you forgive, You stop carrying the oppressor within your heart. You do not excuse their action, but you refuse to grant it power over your peace. And the references are all in the write-up. True jihad al-nafs, striving against the soul, lies precisely here, choosing, with trembling hands and weeping eyes, to hand one's pain back to God, knowing that He alone is the avenger, the witness, and the healer. This forgiveness unfolds in stages. First, we acknowledge the hurt without minimizing it. Then we distinguish the person from their actions. They may have acted from their own wounds or limitations. Finally, we consciously release our claim to revenge or recompense, trusting that God is the ultimate judge. Practical steps include writing unsent letters to express the pain, performing 2 rak'ah of prayer, specifically for liberation from resentment, and when memories resurface, consciously transforming them into dua for guidance for oneself and even for the one who caused harm. Let's now look at healing from bereavement, part 1, enduring the inevitable loss of a spouse, a parent, or a sibling. There are losses that do not simply wound, they rearrange the map of the heart. When death enters the home, it alters the light, the sound, and the rhythm. The familiar cup, the empty chair, the silence between prayers, these become teachers in their own right. Islam does not ask us to deny this pain. It guides us to carry it with dignity, to sit with it in the presence of God, and to reweave a life that honors both the one who has returned to Him and those who remain. In Quran, Surah Al-Anbiya, the chapter of the Prophets, 21st chapter of the Quran, verse number 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Every soul shall taste death, and we test you with both hardships and ease as a trial, and to us you shall be returned." And it assures the grieving. Again, Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of the Quran, verses 155 to 157, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Give glad tidings to the patient, those who, when a calamity strikes them, they say, truly we belong to God, and truly to Him we shall return. Upon them are blessings from their Lord and mercy." Let's now look at losing a spouse, when sakina is displaced and the libas is removed. Libas being garment. Losing a spouse is the unthreading of a sanctuary. The sakina once felt in the home is shaken. Quran, Surah Al-Rum, 30th chapter of the Quran, chapter of the Romans, verse 21, Allah says, "And amongst His signs is that He created for you spouses from amongst yourselves, so that you may find tranquility with them, and He placed between you affection and mercy." The libas, the garment that covered fear and softened the world's edges, is lifted. Quran says, Surah Al-Baqarah, 2nd chapter of the Quran, chapter of the cow, verse 187, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "They are a garment for you and you are a garment for them." Such a loss can feel like an amputation. The ache of a limb that is no longer there may persist. Alongside this emotional devastation often comes practical terror, especially for the widows who may face immediate financial insecurity. The loss of the qawwam who provided, or the kadbanu who managed, creates urgent material needs, not to mention spiritual. Here, the community's obligation becomes clear. The widow and orphans are not charity cases, but are holders of rights upon us. The Quran commands us in Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, 2nd chapter of the Quran, verse 220. "And they ask you about orphans. Say, improvement for them is best." Islah, yani helping them, is best. Practical support, help with paperwork, ensuring inheritance rights, providing temporary financial assistance without humiliation. These become acts of worship. The path forward is not to forget, but to transform. We pour our grief into dua. We keep their memories alive with sadaqah, charity, on their behalf. And we find new purpose in the living duties of tarbiyyah if children remain. And in a khidmah, service, that turns sorrow into a lamp for others. Above all, we remember the situation of Ahl al-Bayt. We remember Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, when he lost his beloved Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her, on these very nights that we are commemorating. We remind ourselves of the pain of Prophet Muhammad when Sayyedah Khadijah departed for the eternal realm. We take solace from such events, and we remember that our grief is nothing. Our grief is nothing compared to the grief that burns in our very souls for the tragedy of Ashura and the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. Having said that, it is clear that the pain of such a loss endures, since the bond was strong and powerful. The bond does not end. It changes its place, migrating from presence to prayer, from dialogue to dua, from shared days to shared reward. This continuing bond manifests in dreams, where the departed visits with messages of comfort, in moments where their favorite verse suddenly brings peace, or the inexplicable sense of their presence during prayer or during other activities. These are not delusions, but gifts, what scholars call the connection of the spirits, ittisal al-arwah. We maintain this bond through reciting the Quran and gifting its reward, giving charity in their name, completing their unfinished good works, and teaching their children and grandchildren the stories that they would have told. More so, we should remember that if our spouses pass away on the path of God, then as we have discussed at length in our 18th session on the art of supplication, and as taught to us in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, 3rd chapter of the Quran, verse 169. Allah says, "And never think of those who have been killed in the cause of God as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord receiving provision." Visiting the grave of one's spouse is an important part of the healing process. And as believers, this reminds us of resurrection, as elucidated by Sheikh Ali Raza Parhayan, who said, "Visiting the graves, especially of loved ones, softens the heart and reminds one of resurrection." The late Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, may God rest his pure soul, is even more specific, and he teaches us that it brings peace and strengthens our faith and belief. He says, "Visiting the graves of believers, especially those with whom we shared emotional bonds, brings peace and strengthens faith. True patience is found not in hiding the pain, but in how we turn with it to God." The Ahlul Bayt have said, true patience is at the first shock of grief. And all of the references are in the write-up. We honor the departed by continuing their goodness. There is a hadith from Man La Yahdhur al-Faqih of Sheikh Saduq, who says, "The deceased rejoices at mercy shown to him or her, seeking forgiveness for him or her, and charity given on his or her behalf." References, of course, are in the write-up. And we steady ourselves by remembering that ease is sown into hardship, even if we can't feel it yet. Quran, as we said in Surah Al-Sharh, chapter of the relief, 94th chapter of the Quran, verse 6, Allah says, "Indeed, with hardship comes ease." Such a loss is never easy, regardless of how long the marriage lasted, be it a few months or decades. A part of you has been separated, but the key here is to understand that they are in the presence of their Lord, and to turn to Imam Ali and Prophet Muhammad and how they dealt with their bereavements. These are our teachers. We also need to understand that death is a certainty, and every soul will taste death. These are difficult tests, as it has been said, but we must be patient, we must persevere, and we must never let despondency and despair ever engulf us. At these times, Satan will target the remaining spouse. Satan will target the remaining spouse. And the only solution is to place our entire reliance on God. We must be from amongst the patient. Those who, when a difficulty, a tragedy befalls them, they place their firm trust in God, in God's plan, and declare, "We are from God, and to Him is our return." Let's now look at losing a parent or a sibling, grief that tests the living bond. Losing a parent or a sibling is the reconfiguration of one's first shelter and earliest mirror. The home may feel less anchored, the story less witnessed. This trial also tests the surviving marital bond. The healthy response is for spouses to become libas for one another again, gentle, protective, and patient, guarding each other's dignity, making space for tears without making a home for despair. The disordered response is to let grief become a third peg in the marriage, quietly isolating the grieving spouse or neglecting the living covenant in the name of sorrow. The way forward is to grieve together, to set rhythms of remembrance that unite rather than divide. Shared dua, weekly Quran recitations gifted to the departed, a small regular charity in their name, visiting their graveyards, so that love for the one who has gone deepens love for those who remain. Our duty to parents continues after their passing, and our tenderness towards siblings can be renewed through their memory. We have a hadith which says, yes, praying for them, seeking forgiveness for them, fulfilling their pledges, maintaining the kinship ties that came through them, and honoring their friends. Within the marriage, kindness becomes a form of worship. In the Quran, Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 19, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, live with them in kindness, and consolation becomes a mark of faith. We have a hadith from Imam Ali, a believer brings joy and gives consolation. Grief will visit in waves. Some days it will be a soft mist, other days a storm. We honor it by giving it to God first, in whispered supplications, munajat, in prostrations held a little longer, in a verse repeated until it loosens the knots within. We accept help without shame, counsel from the wise, support from the sincere, professional care where needed, because tending the heart is part of tending the trust. We allow joy when it returns to enter without guilt, knowing that the heart has seasons and that healing is not betrayal. It is gratitude for the time granted and a renewal of the life still entrusted to us. We also turn to and remember Prophet Muhammad, who lost his father before he was born, and his mother, Sayyedah Amina, passed away when he was but a child. We remember the epic of Ashura, the children of Imam Hussein, Sayyedah Ruqayyah, who lost her beloved father in such difficult circumstances. We remember Said Zainab, Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan, who lost our beloved Fatimiyyah Zahra, whose martyrdom we commemorate in these special nights when they were very young. These are the inspiration for us. These are the ones whose lessons we follow and take inspiration from. In all of this, we remember, patience is not a mask, it is a turning. It is not the denial of pain, but the refusal to let pain be the only truth. We belong to God, and we return to Him. But belonging and returning, between belonging and returning, lies the work of love, prayer, charity, fidelity to our duties, and a quiet hope that the one who mends shattered hearts will, in time, make this tapestry in a whole new way. We resign with joy our hearts and our entire existence to Him, the one in whose hands is life and death. And we place our trust in Him. We do not let Satan build resentment and despair in our hearts. We must purify our hearts. Otherwise, this pain will engulf and Satan will use it as a means to paralyze us. We must make that sacred resistance, the resistance of patience. Sheikh Panhayan, he teaches us, if you do not cleanse your heart of resentments and grudges, no act of worship will save you. A purified heart becomes light and can ascend. And Imam Khamenei reminds us, our life is like ice, slowly melting away. If we offer it in the path of God, that is the best kind of transaction. Let's now look at healing from bereavement part 2, the unique grief of losing a child. There are trials that press on the heart with a weight words cannot hold. The loss of a child, whether through miscarriage, stillbirth, or afterbirth, is among the heaviest of these. It is the ache of a cradle that stays empty, the silence of a name spoken in whispered prayer. Islam does not deny this pain, it dignifies it. It draws the grieving parent close and teaches a way to carry love and loss together without shame and with a hope that reaches beyond this world. The prophetic model, tears with Tawheed. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his family, held his infant son Ibrahim as he was returning to God, he wept. His companions, surprised by the depth of his sorrow, asked, "Even you, O Messenger of God?" He replied, "The eye weeps and the heart grieves, but we say nothing except what pleases our Lord. Indeed, O Ibrahim, we are bereaved by your departure." And the hadith is well reported. It's in the books of the Shia and the Sunnah, and the references are in the write-up. This is the prophetic balance. The eyes weep, the heart grieves, the tongue remains faithful. The grief is not a failure of faith, it is its companion. The tears are not a contradiction to patience, they are purified by submission. This meaning is fully embraced in the Shiite traditions. The Imams, peace and blessings be upon them, affirm that grief and tears are from God's mercy, and that patience is in the heart turning to Him, and the tongue's restraint from objection. We have a hadith from Al-Kafi which says true patience is at the first shock of grief, which we've mentioned before. An important clarification over here is necessary. Grief is not un-Islamic. Grief is not un-Islamic. Crying is not a lack of sabr, fortitude, or patience. The sabr is in the heart's submission and the tongue's acceptance of God's decree. The parent who weeps without complaint against God, who prays while trembling, who surrenders the unanswered questions to the one who knows, this parent is not failing. They are walking the prophetic path. In the tender space of miscarriage and stillbirth, where others may not see a life that was held, God sees every heartbeat, every hope, every whispered name. The rewards and mercies attached to that brief life are not lost. They are kept with God. And there is an important divine promise: the children who precede their parents. Among the most healing promises for bereaved parents is the glad tidings of children who precede their parents to the next day. Their souls are held in mercy, and they are made intercessors for their families. We are taught by the Prophet Muhammad and Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them all, that the children who die young as infants, including those who are stillborn or miscarried, will be gathered on the day of judgment as birds of paradise, awaiting their parents and interceding for them until they are admitted together. The hadith reads, "The children of the believers are in paradise. They will intercede for their parents and their intercession will be accepted." We also have traditions taught by Ahlul Bayt that teach us that children who die, that a child who dies becomes a means of drawing the parents nearer to God. Their small hands, as it were, clinging to the doors of paradise, refusing to enter until their parents join them. They will take their parents by the hand until they enter them into paradise. And the references are on the write-up. This report echoes the well-known narrations from the books of our brothers of the Sunnah to the same effect, and give the bereaved heart a lawful hope. The separation is temporary, and the reunion is dignified. Let the home of grief be a home of dua, naming the child before God, gifting Quran, sadaqat, charity in their memory, and turning sorrow into a bridge. Let the marital bond be guarded, the father and mother as the libas for each other, sheltering each other from the cold wind of silence, permitting tears without shame, and speaking hope when speech returns. And let us trust the one who entrusted that child to their brief time in this world that they have not had the opportunity to share. He has rather advanced it. Let us also in these difficulties never forget our master Imam Hussein, peace and blessings be upon him, who on the day of Ashura held the lifeless body of his beloved Abdullah Radi, sometimes known as Ali al-Asghar, murdered by a three-pronged arrow, who was murdered by the agents of Satan in cold blood, hungry and thirsty. And we say in Ziyarah al-Muqaddasa, peace be upon the suckling infant, the slain one, laying on the ground, soaked in blood, whose blood was raised to the heavens, the one slaughtered in the arms of his father. May God's mercy be distant from his killer, Harmala ibn Kahil al-Asadi. Now let us look at breaking the chains of stigma, the right to renewal. One of the cruelest additions to grief is the stigma our communities often impose. The divorced woman is labelled as damaged. The widow treated as either pitiable or dangerous. The widower expected to remarry immediately, or never. These are jahili attitudes that compound suffering. Islam encourages remarriage for both divorced and widowed, recognizing it as renewal, not betrayal. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, married widows and divorced women, elevating their status. As we've mentioned, for the widowed, the iddah period provides sacred time for grieving before considering and embarking on the future. But when ready, seeking companionship is not disloyalty to the deceased. It is recognition that the human heart, by God's design, has capacity for new love while honoring past bonds. New love does not erase cherished memories, but rather it adds to the heart's journey. Let's now look at our lessons for the present, spiritual tools for the grieving heart. There comes a point along the path of grief when the heart, exhausted from weeping, begins to search, not for explanations, but for orientation. How do we live now while carrying those who are no longer here? How do we walk forward with the weight of memory and yet keep the gaze turned towards God? Islam does not leave the grieving heart without tools. It offers mirrors in the lives of those who bore loss more immense than ours, yet saw in it only the traces of divine wisdom and beauty. Firstly, let's look at the path of Sayyedah Zainab. At the height of pain, when all that was beloved had been taken, Sayyedah Zainab, peace and blessings be upon her, stood in the courtyard of the Umayyad tyrant Yazid, surrounded by loss yet clothed in certainty, and declared, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila," I saw nothing except beauty. In those few words, she redefined the landscape of suffering. Her statement was not denial, it was rida, contentment with the divine decree, and taslim, surrender to his will, in their most luminous and perfect form. She did not say that what she saw was not painful. She said it was beautiful in its truth, because it was God's will. And all that comes from him is beauty, even when veiled in tears. This is the summit of faith, to look upon the ashes of what was loved and still recognize the mercy of the one who gives and takes. I saw nothing but beauty is not spoken from detachment. It is spoken from fellowship with the divine, the heart that has been burnt pure by trial till only trust remains. Let's now look at the living thread, dua, ziyarah, and connection. Healing begins by turning the face once more towards the source. The heart that hurts must speak to God. Each dua is a thread reattached, a bridge between ache and assurance. When words fail, we borrow the words of the infallibles, whose supplications give shape to our unarticulated prayers. In Dua Abu Hamza al-Thumali, Imam Sajjad teaches the broken soul to speak through tears. Imam Sajjad teaches us, with my weeping before you, I seek relief. To recite Ziyarah, visitation, is to remember that those who taught us how to bear loss are alive with God. Every Ziyarah is both remembrance and renewal. It reminds the bereaved that the road of sorrow, when walked towards God, leads not to isolation, but to presence. It reconnects the grieving heart to Ahlul Bayt, who are the masters of endurance and the physicians of the soul. Through their remembrance, their willingness to forgive, and steadfastness, one learns that grief is not the end of the journey, but it is one of its gates. When we send our salam, salutations of peace and love, to them, to Ahlul Bayt, they answer with compassion. And when we ask for the strength to see beauty in what breaks us, their prayers accompany ours. In the rhythm of dua, in the solace of ziyarah, and in the whispered remembrance of Sayyedah Zainab, who saw only beauty in the midst of devastation, the grieving heart learns that faith does not erase sorrow, it transfigures it into worship. Let's now have a look at the fiqh of consolation, how to be present for the grieving. The community often wants to help, but doesn't quite know how. Our tradition provides clear guidance. Imam Sadiq teaches us, whoever consoles a grieving person will be clothed with a garment of honor in the standing, meaning in the next day, in the day of judgment. And Shaykh al-Saduq quotes from Imam Sadiq saying, whoever consoles his believing brother in a calamity, God will clothe him with garments of honor on the day of resurrection. However, consolation requires wisdom. Let's look at what to say. We are from God, and to him is our return. May God grant you patience. May God replace your loss with better, or simply, I am here. What not to say? It was God's will. They know this. At least ... You're minimizing their pain. Or, you should be over it by now. Grief has no timeline. Or, I know how you feel. Each grief is unique. Practical consolation. Bring food without being asked. Sit in silence if words fail. Remember the 40th day, the anniversaries. Include the grieving in gatherings without forcing happiness. Mention the deceased's name. They fear forgetting more than remembering. Let's look at our call to clarify for this last point. Clarifying grief in Islam. We must ask ourselves and clarify for our communities that grief is not a failure of faith. Profound sadness is a human response, a mercy placed in the heart by the one who fashioned it. The messenger of God wept at the passing of his son Ibrahim, holding him close as life left his small body. We must clarify that the believer's tears are sanctified. They are not rebellion, they are prayer. They are not weakness, they are witness. We must clarify the Shar'i line between huzn, or mourning, weeping, sadness, and yas. Huzn, being grief, sorrow, or heaviness, is permissible, and at times purifying. It softens the heart. It turns the gaze heavenward. But yas, despair in the mercy of God, this is forbidden. The Quran warns us in Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Prophet Joseph, 12th chapter of the Quran, verse 87. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not despair of the mercy of God. None despairs of God's mercy except the disbelieving people. Patience is not silence, it's sanctified restraint. We must clarify by the example of our beloved mother, Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra. When the messenger of God returned to his Lord, her sorrow overflowed the streets of Medina. The people could not bear her voice in mourning, and so Imam Ali built her a small house outside the city, Bayt al-Huzn, the house of grief, where she would go to weep and pray, her tears rising like incense to the heavens. That house became a sanctuary not of despair, but of devotion, not of protest, but of love. Said Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her, whose martyrdom we all gather in these special nights to commemorate and to send condolences to her bereaved husband, our beloved Imam Ali, taught us that grief can be worship when it remains tethered to God. We must clarify that Islamic mourning has boundaries, but never shame. The eyes may weep, the chest may tighten, the hands may shake, but the tongue does not accuse its Lord. The believer's sorrow says only, we are from God, and to him is our return. We are content with his decree, and to him do we submit. We must clarify our communal duty, the duty of consoling and supporting, sympathizing, caring, and loving, being pillars of strength to those of our brethren who are in pain, to be their rocks, to be their strength, to help them stay strong, to lighten their pain. This is the teaching, the pathway, the school of the true Islam. It is our obligation to create space for a Bayt al-Huzn in every community, in every home, places where sorrow can breathe, where people can cry without shame, where dua is spoken in the language of tears. We must clarify that grief is not the opposite of faith. It is its companion. To grieve is to recognize love and to carry that love back to God. Please give me a salawat, and we move to the last point, which is significantly shorter, the enduring fortress, societal resilience, and the legacy of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
As we start to come to a close for these nights of Fatimiyyah, and and our discussion on Wilayah in the home, it is only fitting that we lift our gaze from the intimate circle of the home to the wider horizon it sustains. Every prayer whispered between spouses, every act of justice inside a marriage, every child raised upon truth, these are not private victories alone. They are the quiet architecture of a resilient ummah, the house where strength is first learnt, mercy first practiced, and wilayah first made flesh. If the home is healed and the street steadied, if the family stands, the fortress stands. And the light that teaches us how to build and to endure in sorrow and in strength is the legacy of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, the heart of the fortress, the mother of its defenders, and the mother of the martyrs. Let's look at the fortress of faith, why strong or healed families build a resilient ummah. There is a wisdom in how God begins every civilization with a family. The home is not simply an arrangement of living. It is a microcosm of the ummah, a sanctuary where values are first tested, faith first embodied, and the next generation first taught to remember Him. The Quran reminds us that faith is not sustained by numbers, but by patience, sabr, justice, adala, and God awareness, taqwa, that begins at home. In Quran, Surah At-Tur, the chapter of the mountain, 52nd chapter of the Quran, verse number 21, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And those who believed and whose descendants followed them in faith, we will join them with their descendants." Each home is a foundation brick in the building of the ummah. When that brick is fractured, neglected, or hollowed out by injustice, the structure above it weakens. A society built on broken homes becomes brittle, vulnerable to the weight of external pressures and the seductions of alien values. Oppression within the home reproduces oppression in the public square. Neglect of mercy behind closed doors becomes the seed of corruption in governance. But when the home is repaired, when reconciliation, growth, and faith take root again, the sound of that healing extends beyond its walls. The society that is made of these homes becomes a living citadel, independent in thought, rooted in ethics, and immune to the fragmentation that destroys nations from within. In the narration, the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, teaches us, religion is a fortified fortress, patience is its shield, and piety is its gate. The family, then, is the first line of that fortress, its gatekeepers and its watchmen, united under the banner of Wilayah. The home in which both wounded and whole hearts are healed in the name of God becomes a site of divine protection. The spouses who forgive one another, who build again with truth and tenderness after trials, are the quiet soldiers of the ummah's renewal. The parents who raise children in hope and service, these are the architects of the fortress of faith. Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her, stands as the eternal model of this strength. Her home was small, its contents few, yet from that house radiated the light of all that makes our ummah unbreakable. From within the modest dwelling came the voice of justice that refused to compromise. And from her sorrow emerged patience that defied despair. She bore grief not as passivity, but as principle, teaching that resilience is not numbness, it is standing upright in truth, even when surrounded by wrong. She is the heart of the fortress, the mother of its defenders, the teacher of its believers, and the living thread that connects every home of faith to the house of revelation. To heal a home is therefore not merely to bring peace to a family. It is to restore a wall within the fortress of the ummah. Each act of forgiveness, each prayer whispered between spouses, each child raised upon truth, these are battlements against falsehood. A home illuminated by wilayah cannot be invaded by spiritual ruin. A home that guards mercy as its law cannot be turned by cruelty. A society of such homes, forgiving, faithful, alert, becomes an impregnable fortress that the world cannot shake. Let's now look at the ultimate paragon of resilience, Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, and the jihad against oppression, against dhulm. There is a reason our path returns to her, In Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, the threads of everything we have learnt are woven into one luminous whole. Her life is the synthesis of this trilogy, the first stitch, the unfolding tapestry, and the mending after rapture, all transfigured into a living jihad for truth. The synthesis, session 1, the first stitch. Her marriage was the paragon of simplicity and God-centric choices. When the proposal came, the measure was not wealth or status, but taqwa and wilayah. The home of Sayyid Zahra and Imam Ali was built on little, anchored in everything: truth, worship, service. And they were a living embodiment of the verse of Quran, Surah Al-Rum, chapter of the Romans, 30th chapter of the Quran, verse 21, that we've quoted multiple times. Let's look at the synthesis of session 2, the tapestry. She was the perfect Rehana and Murabbiyah, the guide and the one who does Tarbiyyah. The prophet's fragrant blossom and the nurturer of the Imams. In her arms, Imam Hassan and Hussein learnt the scent of the Prophet's prayer. In her home, said Zainab and said Kulsum learnt the courage that would carry Karbala. The Prophet said of her sons, Hassan and Hussein are the chiefs of the youth of paradise. This is a very well-known hadith. The third session, the synthesis of the third session, the mending. She faced the ultimate tears in the tapestry, the loss of her father, the assault on her home, the martyrdom of her unborn child Mahsin, and the usurpation of her husband's right. Her grief filled Medina, her tears became a school. Imam Ali built for her Bayt al-Huzn, the house of sorrow, so that her mourning could be held with dignity. Reports describe Sayyedah Fatimah would go out to the house of sorrow and weep. Let's now look at her response, jihad without a sword. Her response was not silence, it was jihad. The jihad of tabyin, clarification, the jihad of sabr, patience, and the jihad of wilayah, loyalty. Let's look at the jihad of tabyin, clarifying the truth. She stood in the mosque and delivered the sermon of Fadak, not as a petition for property, but as a charter of justice, a defense of wilayah, and a reminder of the Prophet's trust. Her words braided Quranic proof with moral witness, a woman speaking with the authority of truth. In that oration, she drew the line between power and legitimacy, between governance and guidance. From her sermon, she said, God made faith a purification for you from polytheism, prayer a cleansing for you from arrogance, and he made our wilayah the order of the religion, and obedience to us the honor of Islam. Let's look at her jihad of sabr, enduring with God. Her patience was not passivity. It was the patience of one who knows the measure of truth. She wept, and her tears were mercy. She kept her tongue within the bounds of rida, contentment with God's decree. Her grief became worship. Her mourning became witness. The jihad of wilayah, remaining the axis and tranquility. She remained the heart of the fortress, the second, tranquility for Imam Ali, the axis of the household, the mother of the Imams. In the most fragile days of the Ummah, she steadied the covenant by her presence. In the Quran, we have the famous verse, we've mentioned it a number of times, Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, verse number 187, where Allah says, they are a garment for you and you are a garment for them. In her, this verse became history. Guard for guard, shelter for shelter. She and Imam Ali stood back to back, holding the trust until it would be carried to Karbala and beyond. This is why every path of reform begins with her. She shows us that the strength of the Ummah is born in the home of Wilayah, that resistance to dhulm, oppression, is carried in a mother's arms and spoken in a daughter's voice. That truth can be defended by a sermon, a tear, and a steadfast heart. To follow Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra is to learn the art of building and the courage of mending, the clarity of tabyin and the endurance of sabr, of patience, and the intimacy of sakan and the public trust of wilayah. In her synthesis, the family becomes fortress. In her struggle, grief becomes guidance. And through her legacy, every home of faith learns how to stand when the world insists it should fall. Let's now look at our very last lessons from the present, from a torn fabric to a banner of faith. Every thread that breaks can become a banner if it is rewoven for God. Our homes are not defined by what they have lost, but by what they still choose to stand for. The family that has endured dhulm and healed through it. The parent who has buried a child and found their voice in dua. The spouses who have rebuilt after estrangement. These become lanterns for others still walking the valley of trial. Our trials are not detours from our faith, they are its path. In the same way that Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra turned her tears into testimony and her pain into principle, we too are asked to transform our wounds into witness. Her legacy teaches that sabr is not quiet endurance, it is active jihad, an act of standing for truth in the face of ruin, of choosing mercy when bitterness beckons, of rebuilding what others thought was destroyed. To the sister whose marriage feels beyond repair, know that Sayyedah Fatimah's home was attacked, yet remained the source of all light. To the brother carrying the weight of divorce, remember that broken things in God's hands become stronger at the mended places. To the parent who has buried a child, your tears water the seeds of resurrection. None of your pain is wasted when offered in the path of God. The Quran reminds us in Surah An-Nahl, the chapter of the bee, 16th chapter of the Quran, verse 127, Allah says, "Be patient, and your patience is only through God. Do not grieve over them, and do not be distressed by their plots." This is the patience that moves, the patience that rebuilds. It is the hidden strength of every believing home, the lifeline of every ailing heart, and the seed from which nations are renewed. When the believer endures with clarity, the torn fabric of pain becomes a banner of faith. Our task now is to carry that banner gently, steadfastly, so that others may know by our conduct that sabr is not silence but vision, that healing is not forgetting but remembering with light. In the image of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her, we find the meaning of resilience itself, a heart that weeps before God but does not waver in his cause, a home that breaks and yet becomes the cornerstone of the fortress of faith. And our final call to clarifying our ultimate purpose. We must ask ourselves and clarify for our communities. We must clarify that the goal of Wilayah in the Home, this series, is not the pursuit of ease. It is not merely to have peaceful marriages, tidy houses, or content hearts. These are blessings, of course, yes, but they are not the end. The purpose is higher. The aim is to create homes that breathe faith, whose walls echo with Quran, whose foundations are anchored in Wilayah, and whose children rise ready to serve truth when it calls. We must clarify that every home upon the path of Wilayah is meant to become a fortress of faith, strong, not because it has been spared from trial, but because it has been strengthened through it. Within it, hearts are healed not to retreat, but to return to service. Within it, patience is cultivated not to endure injustice, but to prepare soldiers of justice. We must clarify that the true success of a believing family is not measured in comfort, but in readiness. Readiness to serve the cause of God. Readiness to stand with the Hujjah, may our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return when he appears. Readiness to raise children who will recognize him by their hearts before they even see him with their eyes. We must clarify that Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her, is not only the example of endurance, she is the very blueprint of the believer's purpose. Her legacy leads directly to her son, the awaited wali of God upon this earth, our beloved Imam Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return. Through her, we learn that the home is not a private refuge, it is a sacred trust. When tended with dhikr and justice, it becomes a nursery for the righteous, a sanctuary for the creed, and a staging ground for the return of hope. Let it be understood clearly, the purpose of Wilayah in the home is not personal comfort. It is preparation. Every act of forgiveness within marriage, every lesson of trust taught to a child, every moment of restraint, every whispered dua is a small participation in that preparation. We are not called to build castles of luxury. We are called to build fortresses of faith. We are not called to produce servants of the self. We are called to raise servants of the Imam. And we are not called to escape the world. We are called to complete it by walking the path of the Lady of Light, Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, until light means light. And the banner of truth is handed to her son, Imam Mahdi, by our beloved Wali al-Faqih, may God protect him. This is why every act of resistance today, from the steadfastness of the mothers in Gaza, to the courage of the fathers in Yemen, to the patience of the families in Lebanon, and to the resilience of the households in Iran, is a continuation of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra's jihad. These homes under bombardment, these families facing sanctions, these children growing up amid siege, they are the living fortresses, proving that Wilayah in the home creates souls that empires cannot break. The children we raise today with these principles, teaching them Ashura before teaching them the alphabet, showing them service before showing them success, these are not just our offspring. They are the potential companions of Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom, the ones who might hear his call with their own ears. Every bedtime story about Karbala, every whispered Ya Mahdi or Ya Allah over their sleeping forms is preparing soldiers for the final victory of truth. Please give me a salawat and we have the epilogue.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Title of the epilogue is When the Loom Falls Silent. Every tapestry has a moment when the loom falls silent. The hands that once moved quickly now pause. The heart that has traveled through trial, joy, loss, and patience finally finds a stillness that follows understanding. In that stillness, we remember what this journey was always about. It was never only about marriage, never only about home, never only about comforting of hearts, about the comforting of hearts or the soothing of wounds. It was about becoming individually and collectively people of Wilayah, those who live in fidelity to truth, who forgive not to forget but to fortify, who love not for possession but for proximity to the Most High. Every home we've spoken of, every vow, every tear, every tear, every act of patience was a mirror of something far larger. Every thread woven in faith contributed to the fabric of a fortress that will, by God's permission, one day rise around the Qa'im. May our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return. That stitch that began with love now ends with readiness. Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, peace and blessing be upon her, stands above this tapestry as both origin and destination, the beginning of every righteous home and the mother of every soul that finds its way back to courage. She is the one through whom we learn that to build is to resist, to heal is to prepare, and to love in the path of God is to endure beyond generations. In her footsteps lies the secret of resilience, the whisper of her dua at night, the warmth of her home, that held the light of revelation, the tears she shed in Bayt al-Huzn that became the blueprint for sacred mourning, the firmness with which she guarded the truth after every earthly comfort was stripped away. Our trilogy ends where it began, in the house of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra. There the Prophet's light continues to flicker in every act of justice, in every home that chooses prayer over pride, in every parent who raises a servant of the Imam, in every believer who turns their wound into a window of light. And so the loom rests, but the weaving does not end. Each of us carries a portion of this fabric now, to preserve it, to mend it, and to extend it, until it becomes the banner beneath which the faithful will one day gather, and the Lady of Light will smile upon a world made whole again. Please give me a salawat, and we move to the supplication eulogy for Fatimah Zahra, which is titled, O Light of Lights, Remember Us.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
In your name, O our Lord, O the Most High, O the Most Sublime, you are the most merciful, the most compassionate. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, those through whom mercy descended upon the world, and make this offering a whisper from our hearts to the Lady of Lights, Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra. O radiant daughter of the Prophet, O mother of the Imams, when we remember you, the veil of time tears, and grief returns as if the soil of Medina still trembles beneath your footsteps. We see you standing in the empty house, your eyes seeking the messenger who is no longer amongst us. Your children cling to you. Ali bows his head in a silence deeper than words. The city that once glowed with revelation has turned against its own light. Your ribs are crushed. Your unborn son mourned, your rights usurped. And yet, O Sayyidah Zahra, your voice did not break. You raised it in the mosque and spoke the Quran to those who had forgotten it. You turned anguish into jihad of tabyin, and you turned pain into the grammar of endurance. From your tears came the road to Karbala. From the injustice done to you came the clarion that awoke Hussein. And from your patience came the courage of Sayyid Zainab. And from your silence came the sermon that will be completed only when your son returns. O Mother of Sorrows, look upon the children of Gaza, the widows of Palestine, the starving in Sudan and the broken in Yemen. They are your children too. They cry beneath the shadow of the new Yazids, the disciples of Satan who murder under the banners of power and pride. Cover them, O Zahra, with the corner of your veil. Teach us how to defend truth without surrender, how to mourn without despair, how to keep breathing dhikr while the world burns. O God, by the right of your beloved Fatimah, by the tears she shed in Bayt al-Huzn, by the blood of her unborn Muhsin, we beseech you, O beloved of the Prophet, we send our condolences to your grandson, our master, the awaited one, Imam al-Mahdi. May our souls be his ransom, and may you, O God, hasten his return. And through him, to the hearts of your heirs, to Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani, to our beloved leader, Imam Khamenei, to the steadfast Sayyid Abdul Malik al-Houthi, and to all the noble descendants of your line, and to every believer who still weeps at your door. O God, by the love you have for Sayyedah Fatimah, count us among those who work to hasten the appearance of her son, the final proof, the hidden Yusuf of Zahra. Let our healing, our patience, and our striving be preparation for his company. Do not take our souls until we are loyal to you and to your awliya, no matter the cost, the pain, or the hardship. O Lady of Light, we have no gift worthy of you, only this broken heart, this promise. We will remember, we will rebuild, we will remain, until the night yields to dawn, and the banner of your Son rises over a world made just. Remember us, O Zahra, and ask your Lord to make us steadfast beneath that banner. O God, make us among her true followers, those who never waver, never doubt, never turn back, until we meet her at the fountain and greet her Son, the Master of the Age. Amen, O Lord, Sustainer of the universes. Amen, O Most Merciful of the Merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We now turn to the Maqtal, the climax of cruelty. Tonight's narration recounts the final days, the hidden grave, the manifest light, the martyrdom of Sayyedah Fatimah Zahra, and is delivered by Brother Hasnain Dewji. The full text is available at www.themartyr.net.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. O radiant daughter of the Messenger of Allah, O mother of the Imams, O heart of the Prophet's heart, today we gather our trembling words like fragile pearl petals and lay them weeping at the threshold of your sorrow. After Fadak was seized and the trust of the Prophet's household was violated, your world dimmed, but your light did not. Medina still held your footsteps, but it could not hear your tears. You remembered your father, the Prophet ﷺ, not as a memory, but a living ache. Every corner of the city echoed with your grief. Every breath a whispered Ya Abata, until the people came to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, complaining about the tenderness of a daughter's pain. So he, the loyal guardian of the Prophet's legacy and your companion in fidelity and truth, raised for you a sanctuary beyond the city's indifference. They called it Bayt al-Huzn, the house of sorrows, yet for you it was a mihrab of remembrance. There beneath the sky that once cradled the footsteps of the Prophet, you poured your tears into the earth like a prayer, and the angels gathered them like pearls. So those who had taken your right sought entry to your presence, seeking the balm of your forgiveness. You refused them, for justice is a sacred trust. Only when Imam Ali alayhi salam, that pillar of loyalty, requested, did you consent to receive them. Even then, your face turned away, your silence more eloquent than 1,000 speeches. Their greeting met with the veil of your grief. In that turned face was a verdict. In that silence, the testimony of the oppressed. But your days did not pass in bitterness. You tended to your children and worshipped your Lord through the pain that folded your ribs like pages written with patience. You never complained to Imam Ali alayhi salam, not of the bruises history tried to hide, nor of the throb that kept time with your broken heart. You wore the pain the way the truthful wear their certainty. In your prostration was the horizon, in your whispered dhikr, the quenching of every thirst. In those final days, you called Imam Ali alayhi salam to your side and entrusted him with a will that was heavy and luminous. Carry on the mission, you told him, the mission for which my father led compassion, for which revelation split the night. You spoke of your children's future with serenity of a lamp that knows dawn is near. You told Imam Ali alayhi salam to remarry, your love not possessive but prophetic, not a chain but a trust, urged him to continue nurturing the garden of guidance. And you asked that your burial be at night, that those who had oppressed you would not stand by your resting place, that only the faithful, those whose hearts remembered, would carry you to your Lord. You asked that your grave be hidden, that the earth itself would veil your sorrow, and that history would forever search for you with contrite hands. On the last day, you bathed your children, your hands, those hands that ground the grain till they bled, those hands that held the hands of the best of creation, prepared food for Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You sent them to the mosque with their father and turned to prayer with your servant Asma as your witness. When my zikr falls silent, you told her, know that I have returned to my Lord. Then you withdrew, and the world drew its breath. time listened, the house listened, the angels stopped their wings, and then your zikr quieted, not in absence, but in arrival. Asma trembled between duty and dread, holding back the food for the boys, honoring your last request. When Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein returned, they would not eat without you. Their little hands, so accustomed to your touch, sought your presence. Asma, may Allah bless her truth, gathered her courage and told them, your mother has returned to Allah towards the mosque. Imam Ali alayhi salam heard and the earth beneath him tilted. As a mountain walk when its heart collapses, he ran, and with each step, a lifetime of loyalty broke open in sobs. He reached you, O Zahra, and the house seemed too small to hold that grief. He washed your pure body, and the tenderness of one who had known you. When his hand passed over your shattered ribs, he broke. Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Lion of Allah, shattered not by armies, but by the wound the world left on the trust of the Prophet. Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam clung to your shrouded form, their small voices calling, their small tears baptizing the shroud. The heavens stirred. Jibreel alayhi salam descended, beseeching Imam Ali to gently separate them, for even the angels had become grief-stricken at the sight. How heavy must be the sorrow that burdens the wings of Gabriel. The night came, and with it the secrecy you had willed. A handful of loyal hearts moved like shadows beneath the gaze of Allah. They carried you through the darkness, and the stars bowed their lamps. Several graves were dug, that your resting place be hidden from those who had hidden justice. The soil revealed you in the hush of fidelity, and Imam Ali alayhi salam, the trustee of the Prophet's trust, stood by the grave and recited Quran, each verse a lantern. He turned his face towards the horizon of Medina and spoke to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Peace be upon you, O Messenger of Allah, from me and from your daughter, who has alighted beside you, swiftly following you. I return your amana, your trust to you. Ask her, O Messenger of Allah, how the Ummah treated her after you. O Zahra, your grave is hidden, but your light is not. Your house of sorrows still stands in the hearts of those who remember. Your tears became the river by which truth is measured. Your silence is the indictment history cannot bury. Your will is a compass, your patience a scripture written upon the ribs of the oppressed. You taught us that dignity can whisper where power screams, that justice can wear a veil and still be seen by God. O the daughter of the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, O mother of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, O beloved of Imam Ali alayhi salam, intercede for us. Teach us to love you as you loved, to be steadfast as you were steadfast, to guard trust as you guarded the trust, to let our hearts build a Baytul Huzan within them, not for despair, but for remembrance, not for defeat, but for fidelity to the Prophet's path. We did not stand in that night, but we stand here now, our hands empty, our eyes full. We ask you, O Lord, the Lord who praised with you praised with your last breath, write us amongst those who are faithful to your cause, who weep for your sorrow and who rise for your truth. Peace be upon you, O Fatimah Zahra alayhi salam. Peace be upon your broken ribs and unbroken will. Peace be upon your hidden grave and manifest light. Peace be upon the one who grieved for her father and became the mother of a nation's conscience, until we meet at the pool with the messenger smiling and you, O Zahra, at peace. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
We now continue with the Nohe, our collective cry for justice. Tonight's lament is Daughters of Zahra, remembering not just her, but all her spiritual daughters who have faced oppression, who have built homes on faith despite trials, who carry her legacy of patience and protest. The full collection can be explored at www.shiasounds.com.
Oh, Satan, he fell, and a mission he declared. No child of the clay would ever be spared. He set forth a plan to prove unto the Lord, from the heat of the furnace he tempered a sword. But the Lord crafted a pen, pure ink and a page, and he wrote there upon it every warner and sage. He established the seal with an offspring divine, and seared through the parchment a name so sublime. From thence all creation bore a mission to hide, and a rage that engendered in the one who's despised. For all that is evil was shook to the core. For eternal the name all of womankind bore. Each groan of creation cries, Ya Zahra. Each womb bears the wound of sweet Fatimah. Oh, witness the cursed one, he searcheth the wounds, he seeketh the pure one in his darkness and gloom. He sets forth delusion and poisons the minds. They bury their daughters by Satan's design. Fearful the mother of martyrs would rise. He hardened their hearts and he blinded their eyes. The seal of perfection, he brandished God's word. He ended the torment and hearts he had stirred. Yet monsters they hunted, they tore and they killed, they crushed and they stole, and her blood they have spilled. O witness the cursed one, he searcheth the wombs, he seeketh the pure one in darkness and gloom. Each groan of creation cries, Ya Zahra. Each womb bears the wound of sweet Fatimah. Oh, hollow the voice of disease calls to prayer. Believers in exile, deceit fills the air. For every testator must surely taste death. They witness their gods with the foulest of breath, while the lovers of Zahra are mocked and deprived. They're forced to drink poison, their holy struggle despised. The son of Khomeini feared to utter a word. Her light, oh so radiant, her truth still unheard. She wanders the hills in a long darkened veil, but for who does she weep, and for who does she wail? Oh, witness the cursed one, he searcheth the wombs, he seeketh the pure one in darkness and gloom. Each groan of creation cries, Ya Zahra. Each womb bears the wound of sweet Fatimah. Her garden is lonely, and one after one, each bloom bore the burden, each a radiant sun. The one who is doomed can make light of her loss. The one who is righteous burned off all their dross. The plague of the hearts brings the stench of the grave that that soul of iniquity that nothing can save. And she calls from the heavens, where is my seed? Where is my offspring, my dearest indeed? And she asks all believers, have you seen my son? But sealed our hearts and silenced the tongues. Oh, witness the cursed one, he searcheth the wombs, he seeketh the pure one in darkness and gloom. Each groan of creation cries, Ya Zahra. Each womb bears the wound of sweet Fatimah. Oh, see where she lays, her child bows his head. The Karban Bala eternally spread. No respite for him in his lonely abode. So long no companion, so deserted the road. His hands, they are healing, his lips bring forth balm, and yet for his mother no fruit of the palm. The one who was pierced, he spoke and they heard, and yet for her grandson no soul hears a word. Each groan of creation cries, Ya Zahra. Each womb bears the wound of sweet Fatimah. Oh, Satan the liar, he laughs and applauds the blood that you spill with your venomous words. He mocks all your tears, lamentation and gloom. He longs for the day of your eternal doom. His fear of sweet Zahra, not based on her worth. His fear was the son that she surely would birth. For he bears a sword, and he'll brandish with might. He'll tear down the temples of murders and spite by the word of the book and the voice of the pen. Oppressors will tremble and hell be their that day 'twill come and collide a fair path. The angels will drag them with a fearsome wrath. The faces of arrogance, contorted by pain, presented unto them her garden again. Each flower now blooming cries, Ya Zahra. Each sun now has set for sweet Fatimah. Oh, look to the heavens, her garden so fair. The light of her countenance radiant there. Oh, witness the cursed ones, they plundered the wombs, they murdered the pure ones, now eternal their doom. Oh, witness the cursed ones, they plundered the wombs, they murdered the pure ones, now eternal their doom.
We now come to our final evening recitation of the Communion of Sayyedah Zahra. On this last night, our visitation carries the weight of 3 nights of mourning, 3 nights of learning, 3 nights of pledging to honor her legacy in our own homes. You can experience the full communion again at www.shiasounds.com.
Peace be upon you, O Zahra, daughter of God's final messenger, mother of martyrs. You whose suffering God witnessed and recorded, whose home was violated by those who claimed to serve the very God who had honored you above all women of the world. Peace be upon the fragrant flower of the Prophet, the one God's messenger kissed each morning in divine reverence, crushed beneath the door by those who forgot that God sees all injustice, records every oppression. Peace be upon you, O wife of God's lion. You who learn that when people abandon God's justice, no earthly fortress can protect, no claim of faith can shield from those who betray His trust. Through God's infinite knowledge, your broken ribs became the first crack in the foundation of every Muslim home. Your stolen garden, which God had granted you, became the first theft of divine inheritance. Your testimony heard and preserved by God Himself, became the first silencing that He would avenge. And now, by God's will, I see in every door kicked down in Palestine, in every woman whose God-given dignity is violated, in every sacred marriage that humans tear apart against His command, I see God. I see God allowing your door to splinter again, that we might remember His justice is coming. Peace be upon Muhsin, the unborn martyr whom God had already named in heaven, the one God took as the first innocent witness, the first of millions He would gather to testify on the day of judgment. Not killed by swords, but by the weight of oppression that God allowed to reveal the truth of hearts by those who couldn't wait for God's decree before stealing what He had ordained as yours. And I weep before God for every Muhsin whose soul He breathes into the womb, only to have his creation declared inconvenient, murdered before breathing the air God had prepared for them. For every Muhsin crushed in Gaza's rubble, still in the sanctuary of the womb God designed, until the bombs, funded by those who claim to follow God, violate even that sacred space. For every marriage that God joined, but humans tear apart, treating His sacred covenant like a disposable contract, aborting the mercy He placed between spouses. O Zahra, through you I plead to God. They crushed your Muhsin to steal what God had given you, and today they crush millions of Muhsins, stealing the very humanity God breathed into us. I bear witness before God. You established the home as His fortress on earth, even as He allowed its door to burn to test humanity's commitment to justice. You were the manager of divine tranquility, the lady of the house where God's light dwelt, managing heaven's blessings with earthen hands that He strengthened. Through you, God taught us that loving mercy is His gift requiring cultivation, that compassion is his strength given to the righteous. You lived as the perfect, fragrant flower, giving fragrance even while being crushed, showing us how God's servants emit beauty through suffering. And Ali lived as the perfect protector, protecting the strength God gave him, serving as God commanded, providing not just bread, but the dignity God demands for all. Together by God's design, you wove the first tapestry, each thread a divine lesson, that marriage is God's earthly sign of his mercy, that true dowry is simplicity before him, that two souls can face the world's hatred and still find his tranquility reflected in each other's eyes. God strengthened you to rise, broken-ribbed, bereaved, betrayed, and speak his truth in the mosque where they thought they could silence half of his creation. Not begging for property, but declaring God's justice. Not pleading for pity, but performing the autopsy of a nation that had murdered its covenant with God. Through divine inspiration, you clarified, showing them how they had divorced themselves from God while claiming to be his deputies on earth. And God preserves your voice today in every woman who says, enough, with his strength, in every mother who refuses the false mercy of euthanasia, in every daughter who will not let them sell the dignity God gave her. But where are we before God's throne? When we shatter the marriage he blessed, when we abandon the elderly he commanded us to honor, when we murder the souls he's breathing into wombs, when we break the homes he meant as sanctuaries. O Zahra, through you I confess to God, they broke your home to steal power from him. We break our homes and call it freedom from him. You were the truthful one, the one whom God granted vision beyond the veils of time. Through his knowledge, you saw your son's martyrdom before his birth, Zainab's sermon before she could speak, Karbala's tragedy written in God's preserved tablet. And God shows you our state now, building houses but not homes for him, having weddings, but not marriages blessed by him, birthing children, but not raising his servants, aging in bodies, but not growing closer to him. You witness, by God's will, men who memorize your words while crushing what God entrusted to them, claiming to be protectors, but acting as the tyrants he forbade. You see through his light women who weep for you while breaking their own covenants with God, abandoning the children he gave them, neglecting the parents he commanded them to honor. You observe the scholars who mourn your tragedy, while enabling the very injustices God sent you to oppose. But God also reveals to you the mothers of Gaza, who shield their children with faith in him, the wives of prisoners who wait with trust in his promise, the daughters who speak his truth to earthly power. You see the hands that still weave with faith in God. In Yemen's camps, where his name is hope. In Bahrain's basements, where his justice is awaited. In South Lebanon's resisting homes, where they teach children to love God through loving you. And God shows you him, your hidden son, the awaited one, whom God has prepared as earth's salvation, who carries your grief as part of God's plan for justice. Every broken home increases the sorrow God has placed upon his heart. Every abandoned elder delays what God has decreed for his return. Every aborted future grieves the divine plan he will fulfill. For how can God send him to heal when we insist on wounding his creation? How can the divine unity manifest when we choose to scatter from his robe? O daughter of God's beloved, I come to you and through you to God, broken by my distance from his commands, my home fractured by my failures before him, my tapestry torn by choosing other than what he chose. I have not been what God commanded me to be. Not the garment that conceals faults as He instructed. Not the fortress of divine tranquility He meant me to be. I have treated His sacred trusts as disposable, valued this temporary world over His eternal promise, chosen comfort over His covenant. But through your teachings, God has shown me that He accepts the repentant, that oppression must be named before Him, that His patience has limits, and that some separations are His mercy. So I pledge before God, through your intercession, to honor marriage as He revealed it to you, to protect children as He commanded through you, to speak His truth against tyrants as you spoke it, to weep, but weep productively as you wept in the house of sorrows. With God as my witness, I will not let them normalize breaking His design. I will not let them call murder healthcare when He calls it killing. I will not let them make His sacred bonds into marketplaces. God reveals that the assault on your home continues, not with swords, but with systems that oppose His order. They don't burn the door, they foreclose the homes God meant as sanctuaries. They don't crush the baby, they make God's gift of children seem unbearable. They don't steal fadak, they steal the very possibility of the inheritance He promised. The same forces that martyred your Hussein now martyr the family God established as society's foundation, making men too broken to be the protectors God appointed, making women too exhausted to be fragrant flowers God intended, making children orphans while their parents live but don't parent as God commanded. And the scholars who should defend God's plan through your legacy debate your history while His principles are slaughtered. O Zahra, ask God to wake us from this sophisticated slumber. God has made you not just Hussein's mother, but the spiritual mother of every revolution He inspires against injustice. Your DNA, by God's design, runs through Gaza's mothers who gather their children's pieces while praising Him. Your strength which God gave you flows through wives whose husbands are disappeared by those who deny His justice. Your wisdom, inspired by God, guides daughters who refuse to let materialism consume what He made sacred. Every woman who says no to commodification of God's gifts. Every mother who refuses to abandon the role he gave her. Every wife who demands his justice, not just patience, is your daughter in his sight. And every man who protects as God commanded without oppressing, who provides as God instructed without dominating, who leads with service as God's prophet showed, is Ali's son in divine truth. God made the family the last fortress against the empire of isolation from him. And that is why his enemies targeted. With debt, with drugs, with despair, with false freedoms that imprison souls from him. But God preserves your memory, your home, small, simple, sacred to him, where his appointed leader played with his children, where the mistress of all women ground grain with hands he blessed, where heaven touched earth by his command. O Zahra, by your suffering that God witnessed, by your rights that God will restore, by your unborn whom God received as martyr, by your testimony that God preserved, I swear before the throne of the Almighty, I will not let them break another door without standing for God's justice. I will not let them crush another soul without raising my voice for his truth. I will not let them steal another inheritance without demanding what God has decreed. O God, through your beloved Zahra, count me among those who choose difficulty with dignity in your path over ease in distance from you, who choose simple weddings blessed by you over extravagant divorces that anger you, who choose present parenting as you commanded over profitable absence that you forbade, who choose your covenant over worldly contracts. Let my home be your sanctuary of tranquility, even if small. Let my marriage reflect your mercy, even if tested. Let my children be your servants, even if few. We send our condolences, asking God to convey them to you, for all he tested you with, and all you endure in witnessing our failures. To your father, God's beloved prophet, whose nation betrayed God's clearest command through him. To your husband Ali, whom God strengthened to hold you as you return to him, who built you a house for grief by divine permission. To your sons, Hassan, poisoned, Hussein, beheaded, who inherited the resistance God placed in your heart. To your daughters, Zainab and Kulthum, who carried God's message through your voice to tyrants, and especially to your hidden son, the awaited one, whose heart God fills with grief for every broken home, every abandoned divine principle, every betrayed covenant with the Almighty. To our leader, Imam Khamenei, whom God has appointed to guard the fortress of divine authority. To the martyrs' families who understand that God's pleasure matters more than life. To every woman facing abuse behind closed doors. God sees you. To every man struggling to be worthy, God strengthens those who turn to Him. To every child growing up in wreckage, God is the protector of the orphan. We send condolences that you must live in a world that learned nothing from God's lesson through Fadak. But God's dawn is coming. Your son will return by His command, and he will ask in God's name. Did you preserve the families God entrusted to you? Did you protect the woman God honored? Did you raise the children God sent as trust? Did you maintain the homes God meant as sanctuaries? Or will he find empty houses, full of possessions, but empty of God's remembrance? Broken contracts instead of divine covenants, abandoned elders and unborn dead against God's command, a wasteland where God's garden should be. O Zahra, ask God to help us prepare for the path of your son. Plead with him to help us mend what we've torn. Intercede for us to rebuild what we've demolished. Beg him to make us worthy of the return he has promised. Let every marriage be a sign of God's coming justice. Let every child raised in faith be a soldier for his cause. Let every home that stands against the storm be a fortress of the divine revolution. Until God sends it, we are his servants through you. Our homes are dedicated to God through your example. Our struggles are offered to him through your intercession. Our children are raised for God, inspired by your teachings. Through you, we ask God to use us to prepare the world for your awaited Son. And we beg God's forgiveness through your intercession. For every door we failed to defend in his name, for every covenant with him we broke, for every sacred trust from him we violate. Peace be upon you, O daughter of God's final messenger, O wife of God's appointed successor, O mother of God's awaited proof. Until God takes our souls, until he brings the meeting of eternity, until he fills the sky with your son's banner. We remain before the Almighty, your unworthy servants, seeking his mercy through you, his broken children seeking his healing through you, his hoping slaves seeking his forgiveness through you, through the broken home of Zahra. We return to the eternal abode of God, our Lord, O most merciful, O most compassionate. Accept this whisper. Accept this communion. Accept this ballad. For you alone are the goal, and you alone remain. Hear our plea, O most merciful of the merciful. Hear our pleas, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. And from him alone is all ability, and he has authority over all things.
As we close these 3 nights of sacred learning and lamentation, we recognize that Sayyedah Fatimah's greatest lesson was this: even when the tapestry is torn by oppressors, even when rights are usurped and doors are broken, even when the body is crushed and the heart is shattered, faith remains, Wilayah endures, truth will triumph. Tomorrow we gather for the day of Fatimiyyah, the commemoration of the martyrdom, with the special Maqtal narrated by her awaited son, Imam al-Mahdi. May God hasten his return. Until then, may your homes be protected from the oppression that befell hers, and may your families be strengthened by the faith she embodied. Peace be upon you, and peace be upon Fatimah Zahra.